Part 85. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 844. Greet stood quietly beside him, saying nothing. He has always been very optimistic about this girl Leia. Self-reliant, and very diligent in working in the hospital, follow-up reports from little Jenny and Cyrilla. Now, someone wants to take her away and give her a better life, and Greet has no intention of intervening. No one could take Leia away if she didn't want to, if she wanted to. Greet thought to herself that there was a way to ensure that she would not be treated too miserably in the future. For example, can the woman who signed a magical contract and asked to be taken away from her always fulfill her promise? So he just watched. And little Leia, standing in front of him and the lady, lowered her head to think for a moment, then smiled brightly. "Thank you for your kindness, my dear lady." She lifted up her skirt and curtsied in a decent manner, at least in the eyes of people like Greet, who was very unfamiliar with Western etiquette. It was decent enough, and she didn't know who she learned it from. "But I don't want to go." "Why? Are you worried that I won't treat you well?" The female magician looked at her seriously. His green eyes were filled with sincere kindness and compassion. Even if she didn't release charming humans, the effect was close enough. "I can swear an oath, or sign a magic contract. If you are worried that you don't understand magic and can't understand the contract, I can also sign a contract with the healer you trust." She raised her hand and pointed at Gretel. Leia looked up along her fingertips, her eyebrows curved, and she smiled sweetly. "You're not worried about that, noble lady. I'm already living a good life here, with enough food, warm clothes, and books to read. Moreover, Mr. Master gave me a job." She stretched out her hands, flattened her palms, and showed the calluses on her fingers and palms to the female magician. "Mr. Master promised me that I can work in the hospital no matter whether I am cured or not. I rely on my own work to earn food and clothing, and live a very peaceful life. Compared with you taking me in and treating me like your daughter, I would rather much more at ease." Her body was still stooped, and her back still couldn't straighten. However, the light in the girl's eyes was as bright as the stars, and the spine in her heart was straight. The female magician laughed unconsciously. She touched Leia's hair, took out a colorful straw bracelet, and put it on her wrist. "Sorry, I tested you. This is a gadget I made myself, just as an apology to you. Now, can you let me, Mr. Mage, whom you trust, have a chat alone?" Leia looked at Gretel. Seeing Greet smiling and nodding, she knelt down and saluted again, then left. The female magician took a deep breath, turned around, and bowed deeply to Gretel. "I'm very sorry for testing you. Let me introduce you again. My name is Marianne Weil, the wife of the Count of Ostend. The child entrusted to you is my eldest son." Gretel nodded gently into her green eyes, not showing the slightest hint of surprise. The Countess smiled sadly. "I'm sorry, it's not that I don't believe you, but that Andrei is my eldest son and the only son I have now. As a mother, if I want him to take such a risk, I always want to be more sure." Gretel stared at her silently. The Countess lowered her head and smiled bitterly, then raised her head again and looked directly at Gretel. "After all, I will go to war. When the contract is signed, I will return to Ostend and fight alongside my husband. Live together and die together." Her back was straight, her eyes were full of tenderness, and she emitted a fierce light like a warrior. His eyes dropped slightly but were full of love, and he stretched out his hand to press forward, as if stroking his son's little head. "I want to be sure, I want to see that even if we both die, Andrei will still be entrusted to a reliable person. That person will treat him carefully and not just because he lost his parents. Neglect or even abandon his treatment. You are that person. You will do this to the girl named Leia, and you will do this to my son. I am relieved to entrust André to you. Gretel sighed softly. For the patient's family members, such temptation is considered civilized and polite. He stretched out his hand and shook it lightly with the Countess. I am a healer. In my eyes, there are only patients and healthy people. There are no Count's sons or children who have lost their parents. If any patient is handed over to me, I will do everything in my power to restore him to health. The patients I treat, whether they are men or women, nobles or slaves, my only purpose is to seek happiness for the patients, regardless of religion, nationality, race, politics, or status. It's hard to do this. However, I will try my best to do so. The Countess went away quietly, as if she were merely a member of the embassy visiting one of the stops arranged by the Parliament. Gretel didn't go to send it off, as if he had fulfilled all his obligations and was immersed in medicine again. On the mission side, the Dutch nobles who were negotiating with the jury had already exploded. Parliament agrees to aid them. Very good. The council is willing to sell them magic scrolls. Bye. Anyway, businessmen in the Netherlands don't have much else but a lot of money. Rather than being blown away by the glory Holy See, it would be better to hit them on the battlefield and cause them pain. Is there a level 9 scroll? What? Not selling? The 8th level scrolls are not sold either? Is level 7 okay? Just kidding, of course not. Do you have strong enough spellcasters? Taking a step back, do you have strong enough professionals with spellcasting experience? What do you think the scroll is? Just pull it open and you can bang. There is really nothing you can do about the magic scroll. Fortunately, the council is still willing to sell magic equipment. Triggered magic props? Bye. What, the number of magic props is not enough, but you see this explosive pack is also very good. With one blast, it can also blow down a wall of the church? No problem. Let's try 100 packs first to try out the effect. Willing to sell them healing potions. Bye. Buy as much as you can. What, the amount of healing potion may not be enough? What should I use, penicillin, streptomycin, and the top part of the battlefield first aid kit? Just support it? Anyway, low-level warriors and knights who have just advanced are not guaranteed to receive treatment. There is no healing potion, there is something else, which is better than nothing. What, there's pain relief equipment here. It activates for 6 hours at a time and comes with a magic chip that can cast the spell 10 times. If you run out, there are energy storage chipsets here in the council. Can you get a discount if you buy more? Bye. This thing is so useful, even if you don't use it yourself, you can resell it to the Kingdom of Rhine. Gretel, jingle dong, jingle dong, jingle dong. Hey, when did I get so much extra money? Do I need to upgrade any equipment? What if, just in case, I have to go to the battlefield? Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, ask for all kinds of. Already confirmed to participate in the 515 update, there will be an update of 5 chapters, 25,000 words, tomorrow. You can draw 5 prizes for everyone. Please take a look at your fan value. If it is less than 500, subscribe more. Only those with more than 500 fan value will be eligible for the lottery. Thanks to Ed for the 5,000 starting coins. Thanks to Ed Uchiha Kentetsu for the 500 starting coin reward. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 845. There is still a long time from when the Parliament and the Dutch envoys reach an agreement, to when the envoys return to confirm, and then to the implementation of the agreement. The situation in the Netherlands slowly simmered until a single spark turned into a prairie fire, and it would take a long time. However, the famine still followed its established pace, taking care of itself and arriving without any control. Lynn wrapped her fur cloak tightly and walked silently by the stream. It was windy and snowy, and the white snowflakes covered the entire field of vision, and only the outline of the stream bank could be vaguely distinguished. Through the wind and snow, from the feet, to the stream, to the lake in the distance, the whole world is covered with snow. Lynn sighed and listened carefully to the sound of the wind around him for a while before moving forward. As I was walking, there was a sudden click under my feet, and the crisp sound of broken ice exploded. It was too late for him to retreat, so he smashed the ice and stepped into the stream. The cold stream water poured into his boots, and he couldn't help but shiver. This is June. This is June. Although little Gretel had warned that this year's climate was unusual, it would be extremely cold even in June, and frost and snow were more likely to occur. However, he really couldn't believe it without seeing it with his own eyes. He bent down and patted the top of his boots gently. The mage skillfully flew out and swept away the stream water in the boot. After thinking about it, I still haven't put on a cold resistant and heat resistant for myself. Even though he was already a 7th level mage, his long adventure career still taught him not to waste any spell, even a 1st level spell. Because, maybe at some point, you will need to rely on this 1st level spell to save your life. Moreover, the existence of cold and heat resistance will make him lose his keen sense of environmental changes and slow down his reaction speed. In the wilderness, in unsafe places, this can be nearly fatal. Boss, let me explore the way. A small head poked out of the collar of the fur cloak. After sniffing, he jumped down, his body expanded and stretched, and he instantly transformed from a palm-sized kitten into a leopard. It's not the black panther that changes daily at home, nor is it an enlarged version of the black cat with a white scarf and white paws, but a snow leopard with gray-white fur and black spots. Sweeping its big fluffy tail from left to right, it immediately swept away a piece of soft snow. With such heavy snow, of course the great Mr. Trochka must go in front. The snow leopard raised its paws to the sky and rolled, then rolled again, stood up and shook its body vigorously. Snowflakes exploded from him in all directions. If Lynn hadn't been experienced and took 2 steps back in time, he would have been covered in snowflakes. Forget it, if you can walk on it, I can still sink it. Lynn complained angrily. Mr. Trochka walked forward briskly, his big paws stepping on the snow without slipping at all, and his tail slapped the snow. Boss, what did you say? I was careless. Careless. Look, boss, if my tail whipped through the ice, you would definitely be able to leave. Lin sighed and silently followed him into the snow. A few miles away, at a bend in the stream under a cliff, several bison huddled into a small group, protecting the cows and calves in the group. The bull lowered his head and dug hard at the snow, trying to take a bite of the green grass under the snow. It has dug a big hole in the snow, but not much grass has emerged. The younger bull behind him has become significantly thinner every rib, and his mane is messy, with no trace of luster in sight. Lin closed his eyes slightly, then opened them slightly. Even without using magic, the 7th level necromancer's instinct allowed him to clearly sense. These bison are not far from death. Well. He sighed softly. He himself was not afraid of starving. Before setting off to the new world, Gretel was almost paranoid and stuffed him with a space bag that could hold 1,000 pounds of items. There were 600 pounds of food in it. Freshly slaughtered beef, extremely seasoned in the savage way, made into tough-to-bite beef strips. The milk is dried in high-speed hot air and turned into dry powder, which is placed in glass bottles and piled up in a hill-like pile. The fat is boiled with salt, sauce, vinegar, pepper, chili, and other seasonings, then frozen into brick-like cubes, then cut into small pieces and carefully wrapped. Holding one of the snow-white candy cubes in your mouth can quickly replenish your energy. Greed was afraid that it would not be enough, so he stuffed a few large bags of glucose powder. Instantly freeze-dried vegetable bags, £1 per bag, full of 50 bags. If this is not enough, 2 large bottles of sodium ascorbate used to treat sea plague. With these material reserves, even if Lin An fell into a desperate situation and completely ran out of food, he could survive for half a year with them. Besides, it's not like he had a broken hand or foot, lost the ability to cast spells, or was separated from Mr. Troca and the Golden Skeleton. Whether it is hunting, gathering, or buying or exchanging with local indigenous people, it is very convenient for a level 7 spellcaster to find something to eat. So far, he hasn't touched a single bite of these stored grains. But, if he can bear it, can these natives bear it? From what Lin had seen during his travels, the area occupied by the Parliament in the New World was only an area of 100 or 200 miles inward from the coastline. Further in, following the rivers and lakes, the indigenous residents that can be affected are only 300 to 500 miles away. In other areas, on the vast land, these indigenous people, these creatures. The smell of cold and death permeated the land. As a necromancer, his spirituality permeated and ascended, almost cheering. The more death-abundant a place is, the faster the necromancer will progress. But, such suffering and sorrow are truly unbearable to look at. Lin An felt that her heart was getting softer. Especially being with Gretel, staying in his mage tower for so long, watching him busy every day, studying how to cure diseases and save people. Over time, it seems that the death of a person is an unbearably sad thing. Lin tightened his cloak, checked the direction, and continued walking southward. As we walked, we heard a faint roar of beasts in the wind and snow ahead. Before Lin could react, Mr. Trochka jumped slightly and stood in front of him. "Boss, be careful. There's in front of you. There are wolves." There were groups of wolves, bears, and leopards hunting a rather small herd of bison. Lin An looked up into the distance, his eyes narrowed involuntarily, and he threw out a detection spell. Among the beasts, there was an unprecedented strong magical aura shining. It's not just warcraft, this is natural spirit. It was a natural spirit that took the carnivorous monsters in this area and hunted them personally. "Let's go," he summoned a phantom pony, turned over and rode on it. With a flick of his 5 fingers, he and the phantom pony were given all the imaginable acceleration and protection spells. "Mr. Trochka, come up. Let's go immediately. Go to the south, to a warm place. Although the south is not peaceful either. After a great disaster, there will be a great epidemic. Moreover, further south, bordering the territory occupied by the Glory Holy See, small-scale conflicts occurred from time to time. However, as a necromancer, he might be able to do something. Go south. Go somewhere warmer." In the wilderness, Elder Rana's face was ashen. Like Elder Brock, they also received advance notice from the Magic Council. The difference is that the area they are in is closer to the east than White Eagle Brock's tribe. In other words, they are more distant from the Parliament, understand each other less well, and they are less trusting in the news from the Parliament. When the White Eagle tribe and dozens of surrounding tribes followed the advice and went all out to collect grain, their precious wealth was still consumed on spirits, jewelry, gold cups, and silver plates, and even thin and dazzling silk. And this also caused that when the white-haired wind swept across everything and the thick ice lingered, his tribe, as well as many surrounding tribes, had begun to run out of food. Representatives from dozens of tribes and various factions who came to participate in Akula came to him to discuss, and the result was: "Go south. Let's go south. Follow the old method, go to warm places, rob and kill. Let those cowardly southerners hand over their food, livestock, and wine. Go to their heavy, solid houses, spend the winter here." The war beast roared. The barbarians tore off their heavy cloaks, exposed their chests, and roared into the north wind. The strong women held down the ram, slit its throat with a stone knife, and let the blood gush into the stone bowl. Dried moss and cow dung were burned, and the mutton was boiled in water to give the tribe's warriors a hearty meal so they could walk farther. Children were running around in the big house, waiting to pick up the leftover bones. Group of warriors, tribe by tribe. Gather and go south, roaring, wielding spears and giant axes, to seek a chance of life for their tribe. As for whether we can grab enough food, will it encounter extremely strong resistance? Or even, will the South be hit by a disaster? Will there be enough food for them to grab? The vast majority of barbarians did not know, and even Elder Rana himself, who made the decision, did not know. The Council of Elders, warriors, only know from their own experience. No matter how disaster strikes, life in the South will always be better than here. Go south. Go south. If you grab it, you will have a way to survive. As for not being able to grab it, after enough people die, there will naturally be enough food left for the remaining people. In the vast wilderness, the barbarians rolled up an iron current and surged southward. In the south, east of the Netherlands, Earl Ascan White Wolf William bent down, picked up a ball of hailstones from the ground, and held it tightly. Hey! Spring came late this year, summer was also cold, and the grain harvest was very poor. After finally struggling to grow a little, he was hit by hailstones all over his face. Ice shards burst out from between his fingers and splashed in all directions. This old level 15 heavenly knight, with two thick white eyebrows tightly tangled, looked at the large tracts of fallen wheat fields in front of him, worried. We are all so cold, the north, those barbarians. Whenever there is a big disaster, they come in groups in small boats. When they get ashore, they rob, food, livestock, women, children, anything that can be moved, everything. The Ascan family, who were granted the title of Border Earl, focused their defense on the barbarians. He is almost 100 years old, and every year he sees small disasters, and big disasters. He has seen it for 90 years. Send the order. Count Ascan's face was heavy, colder than the dregs of hail and greener than the fallen wheat field. Recheck the lookout posts, lighthouses, and beacons on the coastline, and make sure they are fully prepared. Make sure that the barbarians can get the news from any direction. Grain harvesting is carried out, and the wheat and corn that have fallen to the ground and have no hope should be recovered as soon as possible to be used as feed. Strengthen the walls and clear the country, and let the people evacuate into the castle as much as possible. Intensify the cavalry's inspections, discover and eliminate at any time. He ordered one by one, and naturally someone recorded them one by one and passed them on quickly. I heard horses galloping away like rain, and within a short time, the following adjutant had carried half of it away. Count Ascan let out a deep breath, turned halfway and was about to mount his horse, when he saw his great-nephew Otto, the grandson of Albert the Bear, standing straight behind him, hesitating to speak. Count Ascan paused. What? Are you in trouble? No, Your Excellency. No, there is a question, Your Excellency. What's up? 30% of the holy water that should have been allocated to us in the first half of the year has not been allocated yet. Otto put his feet together, stood at attention, and answered nervously. He is only a 5th level knight. Facing the family's backbone, a level 15 heavenly knight, is really stressful. Moreover, as a branch of the family, his only hope of becoming independent was to achieve military success, obtain a fiefdom on the border, and expand outward. To achieve this, getting the favor of the family owner is obviously the most convenient way. The black-haired boy's face turned red, and the faint fluff on his upper lip seemed to turn red. Count Ascan gave him a funny look. What do you think? I think we need to send more envoys to the Holy See to urge them, especially the churches in the territory. Maybe we should also organize people to pray more? Don't they say that only with devout faith can we get more blessings from the Lord of Glory? The old knight slowly shook his head. He straightened his back and looked far south, as if staring at the holy city that shines brightly and will never fall into darkness. After a long while, he waved his hand. You go down. Otto bowed slightly and stepped back quickly. The old knight stared at the mountains in the distance in ecstasy. For a while, he paused and slowly flew up in the awe of the eyes below. Level 15 Sky Knights are named after sky because reaching this level generally has the ability to fly. Invisible and formless arrogance surrounded him. He looked down at the shining silver hailstones around him and the shining river in the distance, with a loud voice. We border people have steel in our bones and flames in our blood. All difficulties and dangers are borne by ourselves. It is with this that we can gain a foothold on the border, generation after generation, year after year. 1 year. White wolf. White wolf. White wolf. Below, the accompanying soldiers raised their weapons and shouted thunderously. No matter what decisions leaders, lords or anyone else make, when disaster strikes, the most seriously injured are always the poorest people. Even Greet, who was doing research in the hospital, felt this. In April, the poor mothers who came to Oak Grove Hospital to give birth could barely see their complexions, nutritional conditions, and hemoglobin levels. In May, most of the women at the bottom of the labor force were sallow and skinny, and could collapse in the wind. Moreover, the passing rate of hemoglobin values for transfusion recipients who come to the hospital to donate blood or sell blood has dropped from 70% to less than 50%. By June, the nutritional level of poor mothers had dropped to an extremely low level. 72 hours after delivery, the proportion of normal lactation has plummeted from 80% before to a shocking less than 50%. Gretel had to extend the hospital stay from 3 days to 7 days to try to give them more nutrition. As for the price paid for this, it is doubling the number of beds in the ward and adding extra beds to the corridor. This is can't care less. It is not necessarily necessary for the mother to starve to death after leaving the hospital, and the baby to starve to death in the mother's arms. In addition to poor pregnant women, the situation of even the nurses working in the hospital is gradually getting worse. That day, Greet finished an operation, and when he was walking from the obstetrics building to the training ground behind him, he heard someone quarreling in the distance. Some people scolded, some begged, some looked on, and some commented. The woman's voice was sharp and high-pitched, much higher in pitch than the man's. Greet walked over slowly, and not far away, he heard the crowd shouting and cursing. Thief, thief. Bitch. Whore. Shameless thing. You have no shame. You shrew dash. There were scoldings, shouts, discussions, and even the sounds of people grabbing their hair and being slapped, all mixed together. Greet frowned slightly, walked near the crowd, and raised his voice. What happened? Don't you know it's necessary to be quiet in the hospital? He swallowed these words and did not blurt out the rebuke. As a mage and hospital director, he has almost unlimited power over these nurses and washerwomen. With just a word, he can tell anyone to get out. The more this is the case, the more caution and restraint we need. So he just asked and turned his attention to little Jenny, who hurried over and squeezed into the crowd. Little Jenny is already 13 or 14 years old. She has been a foreman for several years and has gradually developed her own dignity. She should be able to handle this kind of situation, right? It was obvious that little Jenny had lived up to his expectations. Standing in the middle of the crowd, all the nurses bowed their heads and stepped back to make room for the two quarreling people. Little Jenny glanced at both sides, her eyes fell on one of them's clothes and the ground beside her, and she immediately spoke. Maria, did you steal bread again? I didn't, the washerwoman subconsciously pressed the front of her coat. More bread crumbs fell, and she subconsciously bent down, crossing her right arm and covering her abdomen, trying to stop those bread crumbs. I don't. This is my own lunch. I just want to take it back to the children. The price of bread is getting more and more expensive, and the children are hungry. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, ask for all kinds of. Please take a look at your fan value. If it is less than 500, subscribe more. Only those with a fan value of more than 500 are eligible for the lottery. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Giolan 2020. Chapter 846. Steal bread? Greet lowered his gaze and said nothing. If stealing is a sin, then stealing food may be the lightest of such sins. If a person will starve to death if he does not steal food, then it is obviously not him who commits the crime, but the society that forces him to commit a crime. Jean Valjean stole a loaf of bread and was sentenced to 5 years of hard labor. Gretel always remembered how deeply compassionate Hugo, the literary master in his previous life, described this man, and how much sympathy he received from all subsequent film, television, opera, and literary analyses. But Greet remembered that he gave everyone in the hospital, every caster, security guard, and nurse, plenty of food. So Greet turned his attention to little Jenny, and little Jenny took a step forward and stared at the woman named Maria. Take the bread out of your clothes. This. Take it out. Gretel silently took 2 steps back, turning his back to the crowd. There was a sound of bodies colliding, and then little Jenny's respectful voice sounded. Okay, sir. Greet turned around. The woman's face was flushed, and she stood there uneasily, holding a hard piece of bread in her hands. The bread is not big, just about the size of 2 hands, with a small bite discreetly left on it. Presumably, she used this action to show that she had already eaten, so she put the bread into her clothes and waited to take it home to her children. Jenny, how is the food supply situation in my hospital? Gretel asked softly. Little Jenny bowed slightly. According to your order, everyone will be fed. Each nurse will receive a piece of bread per meal, a bowl of oatmeal, a glass of milk, and a large bowl of cooked vegetables. In addition, there will be an egg at each meal, or a fish, or a piece of meat the size of an adult's hand. As she spoke, the washerwomen around her nodded. He lowered his voice and whispered in agreement. Yes, yes. Miss Jenny is right, no one dares to cheat us. Who can eat so much for people who do menial jobs like us? It's amazing if oatmeal can fill you up. There's milk. There's also meat. If you're still not full, you can add more oatmeal. To be honest, I try to eat as much as possible in the hospital and stop eating when I get home. I save the rations for the children. Where can I find such a kind employer? Kindness, Gretel didn't dare to say it. He just tried to feel his conscience and try his best to feed the employees. The caster has the standards of the caster. He never gets tired of fine food and fine food. Every meal needs white bread and exquisite dishes. A warrior has the standards of a warrior and can eat black bread, but he must be full and have enough meat. Only with adequate nutrition can they support their strong amount of exercise. And the nurses, as ordinary people, all Greet can do for them is to provide meals on time and in sufficient quantity. According to the residents' daily dietary standards, the 3 major items of staple food, vegetables, and meat should be matched as properly as possible to prevent them from going hungry. As for stealing food, Gretel closed his eyes slightly and activated the teleportation technique. In a flash, he was teleported from the crowded square to the center of the mage tower. He tapped the tower spirit panel with his finger and issued an order. Moss, call up the monitoring results of the canteen by the invisible servants. Show them to me yesterday, 3 days ago, 5 days ago, and 10 days ago. Okay, boss. The tower spirit, Moss number 2, responded with a screen of light. Although Gretel didn't care much about these chores, he still knew how to install surveillance and let the tower spirit control the invisible servant to patrol from time to time. The hall, walls, obstetrics building, pharmacy room, ward corridor, laundry room, sewage treatment room, everything you can think of that may be defective, let the invisible servant check frequently. At this time, with an order, the data was immediately transferred out. Greet looked closely and saw that, as the nurses said, there was enough food for everyone to eat. Looking at the import and export of bulk goods, there is also a situation where no one responsible for the management of the canteen is transporting rice, noodles, and meat without permission. He then teleported to the kitchen. In the back kitchen, the oven was steaming with steam, and vegetables and meat were piled high on the chopping board. Greet quickly turned around and saw a dozen cauldrons lined up in a row, which were churning and churning. Oatmeal, mash with lots of potatoes and corn, vegetable soup. The stored grain, the vegetables on the chopping board, the eggs, meat and fish all looked fresh and not moldy or rotten. From this point of view, the canteen managers at least did not make much money. 2. Gretel laughed at himself. This is not the world in his previous life. He still has to work hard to collect evidence and deal with it according to the law. Here, if he suspects an ordinary person of corruption, he can directly use magic to interrogate him, and throw charm humanity and the like at will. If you find out, take him to the city hall and let him die if you want. And if it's not an ordinary person, a spellcaster working in a hospital, who doesn't know that following him carefully is the best way to get promoted. But there are no disadvantages everywhere, which means that the situation outside is really serious now. Gretel slowly walked out of the cafeteria and returned to the quarreling nurses. Looking around, all the women lowered their heads and did not dare to breathe. "What are you still doing here?" Gretel said slowly. "Is there no work to do in the hospital? Have the sheets been washed? Have the quilt covers and pillowcases been removed and washed? Have the walls, bed frames, and tables of the rooms been wiped with disinfectant? All the patients have been seen, and there is nothing else needed. We'll go immediately." The nurses and washerwomen ran away. Only little Jenny stood still, and the washerwoman who stole the bread stood trembling in front of Greet. Seeing the crowd disperse, she fell to her knees with a plop and begged, "Don't drive me away, sir, don't drive me away. I don't dare to do it anymore. You can deduct wages or fine me in other ways. Please don't drive me away. Drive me out now. I really want to live. I can't go down anymore." She fell to the ground and burst into tears. Gretel put his hands behind his back, lowered his head and looked at her quietly. After a long time, he sighed. "What's your monthly salary, Maria?" "5 silver coins, sir." Maria shrank timidly. 5 silver coins, working 10 hours a day, including lunch and dinner. For a washerwoman who knows nothing and only has a handful of strength, it is quite good to find such a job where she can have enough to eat and not be bullied. 5 silver coins, Gretel sighed. "I remember that flour seemed to be worth 1 copper coin per pound. As for bread, I can't buy it anymore, sir." Maria looked up suddenly. "The cheapest rye flour, mixed with a lot of bran, costs 3 copper coins and 2 pounds. Bread, sir, the kind of bread you supply, the size of 2 hands, costs 3 copper coins to buy one." Gretel gasped. 1 copper coin per pound has increased to 3 copper coins for 2 pounds. The quantity may seem small, but the price has increased by 50%. How can the urban poor at the bottom afford a 50% price increase? And this is still in Nevis. The Archmage took pity on us and kept suppressing the price of food. Maria continued to cry while lying on the ground. "My husband's sister's family, in their city, the price of a pound of flour has increased 5 times. 5 times. They have been supporting it for 2 months, but they really can't support it anymore. At this point, tears fell in clusters and her voice choked up. 2 husbands and wives and 3 children came to us with their family. They couldn't find a job, and my husband was kind-hearted, but he couldn't bear to drive them away. The children have been hungry for 2 days, how can the adults endure it? The child can't hold it. Greet let out a long sigh. He looked around and saw that no one was prying around. He raised his hand, and the hands of 2 mages crossed and flew out, lifting the woman from the ground. No matter what, it's not okay for you to take food from the hospital, ma'am. Yes, yes, I am guilty. Maria kept bowing in panic. Gretel had to add another mage's hand, and then turned to look at little Jenny. You have to follow rules when doing things. You can only eat, but you can't take them with you. These are the rules. But, he closed his eyes slightly. If you just take your share out, just pretend you didn't see it. Yes, sir. Little Jenny looked unbearable and bowed slightly. She paused, hesitated to speak, and finally muttered. But sir, if they don't have enough to eat? You can bring bread, but eggs, fish and meat must be eaten on the spot and arranged for supervision. In addition, Greet said with a sullen face, trying to keep his tone serious and sharp. If you do something wrong in the hospital, whether it's because you eat too little, are hungry, or lack energy, you should be kicked out immediately. In the current situation, I want to hire people, as many as they want, and let them figure it out for themselves. By the way, make the bread half bigger. Little Jenny knelt down and bowed, then left quickly, taking the peasant woman away with her. Gretel stood there and closed his eyes for a long time before slowly sighing. He built a hospital, stocked up on food, gave security guards and medical staff good treatment, and tried his best to build a small, warm, and peaceful world without wind or rain. But now, the wind and rain from the outside world are still pouring in. If they die, the people will suffer. The people are prosperous and suffer. People suffer most from man-made and natural disasters. However, the people around here have already begun to flee from famine. Are they starting to flee from famine only in June? Hasn't the parliament already prepared in advance to store food and stabilize food prices? We won't be able to hold on in June. When the autumn harvest comes, winter comes, and next year's spring famine comes, we still have to sell our sons and daughters, and we still have to starve to death all over the land. Greet walked around in circles for several times, but finally felt that he couldn't just sit back and watch. No, you have to tell the teacher, and if you meet people from the review committee, you have to tell them. It is said that he has not had much interaction with this review meeting and does not know anyone. Otherwise, just ask about the progress of the negotiations and how much money he can get, and go to the review committee. He stamped his foot, took out the endless ink pen, and activated the teleportation function on it. The figure disappeared on the spot, and when he reappeared, he had reached the top of Igor Peak. Looking up, he saw the huge Tower of Babel. Speaking of which, the teleportation function on this thing was originally designed to reach the top of Igor Peak and outside the mystery lock. After Gretel reached level 7, he could modify it independently. However, Greet's level of teleportation is really hard to describe. Even though he has exceeded the level of mage, he still won't change. Fortunately, he doesn't have this need. Every day after work and get off work, it's very convenient to sit on Appa's back with Cyrilla and Bernard, chatting and laughing. You should save the teleportation technique for when you meet the teacher. He was quickly received by the Lord of Thunder. Regarding Greet's report and suggestions, the Lord of Thunder remained unmoved, as if he was not surprised at all. After listening, he directly pulled out a piece of paper, slapped a secret mark on it and threw it to him. I didn't originally intend for you to participate in this matter. But since you went to ask, take this note to the review meeting and tell me what I mean. You go and make a trip to that earldom. Gretel held the note and left with tears streaming down his face. Teacher, you didn't write a single word on this note, you just added a secret mark. For a magician, this is equivalent to his own stamp. Do you want me to fill it in myself? Can I write whatever I want? Well, I don't dare. Also, what kind of earldom is that? Which earldom is it? What on earth is going on? Teacher, why did you send me away because your words were unclear? He mumbled downstairs, took the elevator, and descended all the way to the 120th floor of the Tower of Babel. A monk who can run away cannot run away from the temple. No, the review committee changes and the office of the review committee will not change places for no reason. In the past few years, Gretel has become very familiar with being interrogated, having meetings, discussing, asking for money, asking for projects, and running review meetings for all kinds of things. There are 8 members of the review committee. The convention is that one person from each school of thought serves as a rotating member. There is no name on the nameplate at the door of the office, only the representative emblems of each school are engraved. Greet guessed that this is probably to save budget. Therefore, Greet was familiar with the way, so naturally, he was taken to the office of the committee member of the Plastic Energy Department. Mage Nordmark. Please sit down. The rotating committee member this time is a middle-aged woman, wearing a dark blue mage robe with several snowflake-like patterns embroidered with silver thread. Maybe a magician from the direction of ice and snow? No wonder the temperature in the entire office dropped by 2 degrees without turning on the air conditioner. Gretel sat down in front of her politely. He took the teacup from the staff and observed the other person. The female magician was about 40 years old, with a serious face and her hair tied into a tight bun on the back of her head. He had deep nasolabial folds and a deep vertical line between his eyebrows. Even when he took the note and raised his head to say hello, he did not let go. Hello, I am Elias Usman, the rotating committee member of the current Energy Evocation Department. The female magician glanced at the note, then filed it away and rummaged through it on a nearby file shelf. He said hello while looking for him, speaking quickly. I already know your purpose of coming. There happens to be something that requires the council to send a mage of the same level to do. Since it is the intention of the Lord of Thunder, I will trouble you to make a trip. Here. She quickly pulled out a document marked with light yellow, opened it, glanced at it for confirmation, and pushed it in front of Greet. On the island to the west, Earl Rascombe did not respond to the Parliament's call to stock up on food in advance. When the famine came, he did not open the warehouse to stock up on food. Now there are a large number of hungry people in the territory, and the Parliament is negotiating with him to guide the hungry people. He refuses to go to other areas. So someone needs to be in charge. Gretel blurted out. Master Usman raised a stylized smile. Yes. Someone will do the specific negotiations, guide the refugees, and transfer the people, but you need someone with enough weight to sit in and negotiate. Now, it's you. I'll go immediately. The Kingdom of Kent consists of 2 large islands and several smaller islands. The big island in the west is called Ioland. Because the island is lined with green trees and has a network of rivers, it is also known as the Emerald Island and Emerald Island. The territory of Earl Roscommon is in the central part of Ioland Island, a little northerly. It is about 200 miles away from Nevis by sea, and it takes about another 200 miles by land to get ashore. According to the information provided by the staff of the review committee, the Parliament had already prepared a speedboat for the past envoys, but Gretel was very anxious. No need. Find a fast boat and wait for the boat closest to Iolan Island. I will rush over by land. There are already hungry people. That is to say, people have already started to die. At this time, the earlier you arrive, the better. The closest to them is Belltown Port, which is only 20 miles away by sea, but dash. That's it? Gretel jumped up and ran down. Return to the Mage Tower and immediately raise your voice. Bernard. Call Appa. Cyrilla. I'm going on a long trip to the island of Ioland in the west. Will you follow me? Then we must go together. Then hurry up. Pack your things and leave immediately. While relaying the situation, he found the space bag that had not been used for a long time. The largest one had been taken away by Lynn, and swiped things into it. Cyrilla listened for a moment and raised her eyebrows. Then why should Appa run? Let's fly there directly. It's much faster. We'll arrive tonight. Fly directly. Fly away. I'll take you. She spread her arms wide and raised her head proudly. I'm an adult now. Don't talk about you, Bernard and Appa, I can carry a few more. Under the setting sun, on the top of the mage tower, a huge silver dragon soared into the sky. Bernard sat on the dragon's back, head buried, hugging a thorn tightly. Gretel sat in front of him, hugging Appa who had turned into a cat-sized one, with a wisp of white clouds gently surrounding him. That was the shield specially built by Silver Dragon for them. With this wisp of white clouds here, the wind does not blow on my face and the rain does not touch my body. Break through the cold rain and break through the clouds. The silver dragon spread its wings, jumped out of the rolling cloud waves, and came to the top of the thick cumulonimbus clouds. The warm light of the setting sun enveloped them, coating the silver dragon scales and Greet's cheeks facing the setting sun with a faint golden light. Celera, let's go. Go west, go south. Fly along the coastline, cross the sea, and there is the big island opposite. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, ask for all kinds of. Please take a look at your fan value. If it is less than 500, subscribe more. Only those with a fan value of more than 500 are eligible for the lottery. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 847. The speed of the Silver Dragon Express is indeed outstanding. The original plan of the Parliament was to spend a whole night sailing out of the long fjord outside Nevis and into the deep sea, and then use a whole day to land at the port in the northern part of Ioland. Then, take the carriage arranged by the port mage tower and travel overland for 2 days. Horses were changed along the way, and people stopped and drove faster. It is estimated that on the morning of the 3rd day, we will be able to reach Logos Icon. Generally speaking, the speed of an intermediate mage's journey will not exceed the arrangement of the council. And it seems that it is not necessary to send an airship alone for this matter. As a result, Gretel flew away directly on the Silver Dragon. Silver Dragon. Adult Silver Dragon. The flying speed of an adult dragon is several notches faster than the council's ability to change boats and then cars, or stop and go without stopping. By the way, did we forget something just now? Watching the graceful figure of the silver dragon disappear into the clouds, Master Norwood and Aurora stood side by side, fascinated. After a long while, Aurora patted her forehead and murmured, "It always feels like I've overlooked something." That's right. Review meeting. Inform the review meeting, Master Norwood came to his senses later than him. Although I came to my senses later, but because of my rich social experience, I thought of what happened earlier. Boss, they took the silver dragon there. They will arrive tonight, the slowest, and they can arrive tomorrow morning. You have to inform the mage tower over there to guide them and indicate their destination. Yes, but don't fly too far. The two were in a hurry. Hurry. Contact Archmage Carlyle and ask him to contact the review committee and pass the news on as soon as possible. Don't forget that when people arrive here, they still don't know who the council sent there. Gretel arrived at Roscommon territory early the next morning. The vast majority of time is indeed spent on correcting the direction. If you fall down, find a mage tower and ask for directions. After flying for a while, something feels wrong. If you fall again, find another mage tower and ask for directions. and it's too late to bother, so I'll find a place to sleep in a shelter hut and fly again tomorrow. I can find a place in this way, but I can only sigh that the shape of the mage tower in this world is special enough, and the mana fluctuations are obvious enough, so it is really easy to find. The mage tower led by Luo Sikang had obviously received the urgent news from the parliament. 3 bonfires were lit outside the mage's tower, red, blue and white, with 3-color smoke pillars pointing straight upward to guide the guests flying from afar. Sarala retracted her wings and gradually landed. The owner of the mage tower, an 8th-level magician, was already standing outside the tower with 4 or 5 disciples, looking up and praying. "You are finally here." As soon as the strong wind flapping by the dragon wings subsided, the 8th-level mage stepped forward quickly and spoke urgently. "Thank you for the support sent by the parliament. We have communicated with Count Rothko many times, but he has always disagreed, and we cannot interfere too much." His hair was messy and his eyes were bloodshot. He didn't know whether it was because of the bad negotiations in the past few days or because he was doing experiments day and night. Gretel also stepped forward and saluted slightly. "Yes, I am here on behalf of the council." "Where is the count? Can we see him immediately?" "Earl." The host of the mage tower was a little embarrassed. His eyes swept over Sarala, who had landed on the ground and transformed into a human form, as well as Bernard and Apia, and quickly greeted them with his eyes. Then he half turned around and raised his hand towards the mage tower. The Earl is a devout believer. At this time, he should be praying at the spring temple. Moreover, according to the etiquette of the nobles, he should submit the invitation in advance and wait for the other party to respond before visiting. Greet almost wanted to say, "It's already this time, don't worry about etiquette, but think about it, going straight in without saying hello would look like ruining the place." When he went back to his hometown for a visit, the Viscount sent someone to visit him that same day, wanting to invite him to a banquet and interrupt his family gathering. At that time, he was also in an extremely angry mood. "Do unto others, do not impose on others. Wait a minute, thank you, just say hello." He reluctantly nodded and followed the Archmage into the mage tower. After the two parties chatted, and coupled with the information provided by the parliament, Greet realized that the situation was far simpler than he thought, and far more troublesome than he thought. First of all, Losikang County is vast and sparsely populated. The entire county covers nearly 2,500 square kilometers of land and has a population of only about 200,000. Excluding nobles, temples, mages, warriors, and other nobles, there are probably poor peasants. Looks like 180,000. Can't you feed 180,000 people? Gretel asked in shock. 2,500 square kilometers, on average, there are only 80 people per square kilometer. 1 square kilometer, 80 people, not to mention farming. Even if they go up trees to catch birds, go into the water to catch fish, eat grass roots and bark, they can survive this famine. How do you do it, so that there are hungry people, disaster victims, and refugees? If you can't handle it, you need to ask the parliament to send someone. This. The presiding mage smiled awkwardly. The matter is more complicated. In short, you will know when you see the Earl. Gretel really felt something was wrong. Not only does this county have a small population, it is also poor. Normally, the presiding mage in a mage tower in a county town should be above level 10. The person in front of me is only level 8. Even in Heartland City, where Gretel was born, a barren and remote hinterland where even sea fish are rare, the Newman County it belongs to, the presiding officer of the county mage tower is all level 10 or above. This one, level 8. Parallel import, right? Or is Luo's Icon County too poor to support people or mages? Or maybe it's not that the place is too barren, but that it's a man-made disaster? Gretel's doubts turned decisively towards man-made disaster when the Earl's mansion invited him to a banquet. Earl Luosikong was very enthusiastic. As soon as he received the message from the Mage Tower, he immediately sent someone to invite him, and also sent the best carriage in the Earl's mansion. Dark walnut wood, thin gold, and silver wires coiled into a magic circle, but it is as smooth as a mirror when touched casually. As soon as you enter the car, the temperature and the outside are two different worlds. It is actually equipped with the magic of cold and heat resistance all year round. Gretel let out a sigh of relief. This carriage is nothing in Nevis, and almost any 5th level mage can afford it. That's because Nevis has a large concentration of low-level mages, mage apprentices, and craftsmen. But, here, a county with a mere 200,000 people needs to support nobles, mage towers, temples and armies, and maintain such a high level of consumption? On what? Gretel soon knew what to rely on. There is a specialty product in County Roscommon, and that specialty product is quite famous. At the banquet in the Earl's palace, servants in embroidered liveries pushed a ham on a trolley with a special silver bracket, and passed by the guests one by one to show it to everyone. The chef, wearing a white top hat, judging by his clothes, he should be a nobleman, a so-called butler of food, stood up and smiled. Please see, the hooves of this ham are pure black. This is the proof of the black-footed pig, a specialty of the Roscommon Bay area. This pig grows in oak pastures with sparse woods, grows up eating wild herbs and olives, and when the acorns are mature when they were young, they fed almost exclusively on acorns. Gretel's eyes were downcast and he remained calm, but he was frowning secretly in his heart. Growing up in Oak Ranch? Eating only acorns. Oak is the sacred tree of the order of the god of nature. This black-footed pig occupies a large area of oak pasture. Does the order of the god of nature know? Of course, there is indeed no priest of the god of nature at this banquet. I don't know whether he was busy rescuing the refugees and didn't care at all, or whether he couldn't talk to the Earl's mansion and ignored him at all. The chef continued to introduce with a faint proud smile. The hind legs of this kind of pig are cured with pure rock salt and hung in a quiet, almost constant temperature underground wine cellar. The best craftsmen grease it regularly and adjust the hanging position and texture of the meat toward let the ham mature slowly in its natural environment. He raised his voice slightly and said, "The best ham needs to be matured for 4 full years in this environment." It sounds very similar to the commentary of "on the tip of the tongue" or "flavor." Greet smiled in line with social expectations and quickly calculated in his mind. Eating only acorns, how many acorns does a pig eat during the fattening process? How much forest land will be occupied? Obviously these woodlands cannot be cultivated. So, in addition to grazing pigs, how much land is there for people to farm in the entire county of Roscommon? Damn it, there is too little data to calculate. If only we could know the annual ham production here. While Greet was making quick calculations, the chef took a sharp knife from the waiter's hand and gently rubbed a batch on the surface of the ham. The sharp knife penetrated the meat with a smooth and silky process. After cutting off a small piece of ham with a waxy crust, he changed to a sharp knife and gently passed it across. He holds a knife in his right hand and a special square silver tweezer in his left hand, holding the sliced ham. The ham was as thin as paper, slightly translucent, and endless. Apparently the cutter's hand was very strong and steady. Maybe a knight? Greet thought irrelevantly. The black pig grew up eating herbs, olives, and acorns, and was carefully marinated and aged. Its meat color changes from pink to rose red, mixed with white fat, showing beautiful marble patterns. The second son of the Earl took over the introduction and smiled at everyone. The meat is light and soft, mixed with the unique acorn aroma, and the taste is extremely delicate. If you taste it with an empty mouth, you can directly feel its unique flavor. Everyone, please. At this point, the chef had already sliced off a piece of translucent ham that was 1 inch wide and half a foot long. With a slight shake, he rolled it on the slicing knife. At the host's signal, he was sent to the most distinguished guest from afar today, greet. The chef bowed slightly, held the ham motionless in front of Gretel, smiled, and signaled with his eyes. Smell it, then eat it. Greet was also somewhat knowledgeable. He did not change his composure under the cover of the mage's armor and bit off the piece of ham. Chewing it, it is indeed good, very tender and delicious, but it doesn't seem to be what they say. Olive scent? Acorn aroma? Rich and sophisticated flavor? What is that? This smell is not caused by them, right? Cyrilla's thin voice reached her ears through magic. Greet almost laughed. Well, to determine whether it really has this special flavor or whether the seller is just bragging, you should try to conduct a double-blind review. Putting Jinhua ham, Yunnan Suanwei ham, and hams of this kind together, it is best to use specially adjusted raw food methods. Then, blindfolded, not allowed to look, only allowed to taste, tell the number and variety of ham. He looked sideways and saw Cyrilla frowning with her slender eyebrows, chewing twice, pausing, and chewing twice more, with a confused look on her face. Chew a few more times. Hey, gone. I haven't tasted it yet. Ah, Miss Elf, are you interested in our specialties? The host smiled and raised his voice. Anda, give the beautiful elf lady another piece. Giving special care to ladies who come from afar is a matter of course to everyone. As for Bernard, he was not so lucky. 1 piece per person is only enough for 1 bite, whether you chew it slowly or swallow it whole. After a round of empty tastings, Gretel saw various ways to eat ham with honeydew melon. The honeydew melon this year is not good, so just make do with it. Ham with red wine, ham with bread. It's still the same feeling as before. It was indeed good, but the legendary ham fat melted slowly in the mouth, and the rich and layered taste gradually bloomed like a flower bud, accompanied by the unique fragrance of fruit and wood. Greet didn't taste it at all. Seemingly seeing that the distinguished guest was not satisfied with his meal, the second son of the Earl thought for a moment and gave a few instructions in a low voice. Soon, another trolley was pushed out. This time, the second son of the Earl stood up in person and took the sharp knife that sliced meat. Of course, La Sikang's delicacies, the treasures among treasures, are the only ones that can serve as a feast for the queen and a sacrifice to the gods. Distinguished guests, please taste it. Another thin piece of ham was wrapped around the tip of the knife and presented to Gretel. This time, Gretel just sniffed lightly and smelled the familiar strange aroma. He suddenly raised his head and looked at the other party. The Earl's second son, who has reached middle age and has been in charge of the family business for more than 20 years, nodded slightly and smiled. This is a carefully selected magic pig cub that grew up in the oak forest of our family's ancestral land. Growing up, it drank magic spring water and ate the fruits of oak trees that were more than 100 years old and had strange powers. Gretel chewed the ham and closed his eyes slightly. Once, twice, 3 times. The fresh natural breath filled the mouth. Even he, a nearly fake priest of the god of nature, would not mistake that kind of power. Ancestral land? Your family's ancestral land? A woodland watered by magical springs, an oak tree with strange powers? He opened his eyes and covered the coldness in his eyes with a polite smile. Very impressive taste. Yes, yes, the Count's second son said proudly. The entire county of Roscommon produces 40,000 hams every year. Only the carefully made hind legs can be called Rothcombe hams, while the front legs can only be called black-footed pig hams. And the ham of this magic pig is produced less than once a year. Hundreds. It was an honor to taste it. I think I will remember this taste. Apart from the acorn squash ham, the other dishes at the banquet were lackluster. Gretel was reluctant to eat, but the others at the banquet ate with gusto. After finally finishing eating, everyone moved into the living room, and Gretel couldn't wait to ask the question. I was entrusted by the Magic Council to come all the way from Nevis to take over the task of resettling and transporting hungry people. May I ask how many poor people there are currently unable to make a living? When can the transport begin? The smile on the face of the host of the banquet, Knight Pina, the second son of Earl Riscombe, froze. He looked to his left for help. The Archbishop of the Temple of the God of War looked straight ahead and turned a deaf ear. Looking to the right again, the Archbishop of the Spring Goddess Temple smiled bitterly and gave him a helpless look. The host of the local mage tower stood beside the parliamentary envoy and stared at him coldly. It seemed that he had accumulated a lot of resentment, but he didn't file a complaint immediately. This is more troublesome. He bit the bullet and said. The local area is basically made up of tenant farmers. As you know, tenant farmers are not allowed to leave the territory at will. According to the laws and established rules of the kingdom, all tenant farmers belong to the Lord. You see, I am only my father's second son. I have no choice. Be the master. Yes. Liberating the tenants or allowing them to relocate is something that only the head of the family can decide. Pina cannot overstep his authority. Another guest at the banquet spoke up. Greet remembered that he was introduced before the banquet as the third son of a local viscount. The other people beside him who either agreed or nodded were not the nobles who inherited the title, either the second son or the youngest son. What about the Earl himself? Gretel ignored the guest and stared straight at Knight Pina. Or, what about his eldest son, the heir to the title? Father and eldest brother are both in the royal capital. Seeing that the other party did not force him to make a decision, Knight Pina obviously became more courageous. He raised his eyes and looked directly at Gretel. As nobles, they need to fulfill their obligations and be in the royal capital almost all year round. Not only my father and eldest brother, but also the nobles in this area are away from Iolan Island almost all year round. Gretel frowned. He looked around and saw several noble heirs and the two archbishops of the temple nodding slightly, knowing that this was the truth. After thinking for a while, he asked with a glimmer of hope. What about the freedmen? Are there any freedmen who are in trouble, unable to survive, and need to be relocated? Mr. Master, you are joking. Since we are free people, how can we not survive? If we really can't survive, we have become tenant farmers. How can we move around at will? Greed choked on his throat. He looked around silently, his eyes swept over everyone present one by one, and raised a cool smile. In this case, I will not force you to do anything beyond your authority. Mr. Knight, everyone, do you mind if I take a look around in Roscommon County? Of course, of course. We will arrange a guide right now. No need. It's just Roscommon County, I won't get lost. Gretel held his breath and walked away. He summoned two phantom horses and rode side by side with Sirira. Bernard followed behind on Appa and immediately rushed out. After running along the sparse oak forest for an unknown length of time, Sirira suddenly pricked up her ears and reined in the horse tightly. Gretel, do you hear that? What? There. After running forward in the direction pointed by Sarala, Greet also heard the sound coming from the wind. The screams, curses, begging, and whippings were heard, and they were so tragic and shocking. He urged his horse forward again, and saw a man with a bloody mass and half-living body tied to a wooden frame at the entrance of the village. Gretel frowned slightly, casually spilled a piece of healing magic, and asked the person who whipped him. Why does this man need to be beaten? Master Priest, the person who wielded the whip, I don't know if he was the village chief, a soldier, or someone else, quickly put down his whip and came over to salute. When Greet asked, he moved his body intentionally or unintentionally to cover the wooden frame. This guy doesn't deserve your sympathy. He's a thief. He actually dares to enter the master's domain and steal acorns to eat. It's a heinous crime. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, Ask for all kinds of. Please take a look at your fan value. If it is less than 500, subscribe more. Only those with a fan value of more than 500 are eligible for the lottery. Thanks to @Uchiha Kentetsu for the 500 starting coin reward. Ireland is really sparsely populated. The figures for 2020 are 5 million people in the country, an average of 71 people per square kilometre, that's it, including the 1.2 million people in Dublin. The population of County Roscommon is 64,500. During the Great Famine in Ireland from 1845 to 1850, the population was 8 million. For the sake of this number, I multiplied the population of County Roscommon by 3. I don't even know how such a low population density can cause famine and starve to death. I have checked the Great Famine in Ireland from 1845 to 1850, and I still can't believe it. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 848. Gretel seemed to have been punched in the face. Staggering, if the phantom pony could not automatically protect the summoner, it would almost fall off the horse's back. At the banquet, the chef and the count's second son proudly boasted once again. The pigs grow up in sparsely wooded oak pastures and grow up eating wild herbs and olives, and when the acorns mature, they feed almost exclusively on acorns. The black pig grew up eating herbs, olives, and acorns, and was carefully marinated and matured. The meat is light and soft, mixed with the unique aroma of acorns. The carefully selected baby pigs eat the fruits of the oak tree with strange powers. They are Lugos Ikang's delicacies, the treasures among treasures, enough to serve as a feast for the queen and a sacrifice to the gods. Such delicacies, are enough to become a regional representative and a key product that boosts the entire regional economy, but at what cost? The price was that almost all the land suitable for oak woodlands in the entire county was occupied by the nobles to raise the black pigs unique to County Roscommon. The price is that if the poor want to go into the woods and pick up acorns to satisfy their hunger, they will be hung up and whipped. That acorn is bitter. It's bitter. It must be cooked for a long time to remove its bitter taste, and it must be ground into powder before it can be swallowed. Who would go to the woods to pick up acorns to eat if it wasn't absolutely necessary, if they weren't forced to starve to death? 2,500 square kilometers, 200,000 people, 80 people per square kilometer, a population density that can survive by catching birds, fishing, picking wild fruits and digging grassroots, but there will also be situations where people will starve to death. People are worse than pigs. People are worse than pigs. At this moment, Gretel subconsciously clenched his hands. The fingers clenched, opened, clenched again, and opened again, the magic waves in the palms were faintly boiling. I really want to backhand a fireball and blow this place up. Fireball is not enough. If anger can enhance spells, he highly doubts that he can create a big Yvonne. Sometimes, it really takes a spark of fire to turn into a prairie fire to clean up the dirt and filth. However, at this time, stronger fluctuations rose from the right side. Gretel turned his head to look, and quickly urged the phantom horse to come closer. He tilted his body and pressed Cyrilla's hand. Cyrilla, no. Killing people doesn't solve the problem. Pure violence cannot solve the fundamental problem. Even if we kill all the whippers, all the guards in this village, or even all the nobles in this county. Oh, killing all the nobles can indeed temporarily solve the problem, but it cannot cause fundamental changes. Think about establishing better order rather than relying on pure destruction. Gretel. Cyrilla turned her back, stretched out her hand, and picked him up from the horse. But Greet was too lost in thought and moved too fiercely. When his body leaned forward, he almost slipped off the phantom horse. Well. Gretel struggled and fluttered for a long time, and was finally thrown back to his horse by Cyrilla. As for the night training that I have received for several months, and the advancement from a level 1 warrior to a level 3 warrior, well, don't worry about it. He coughed as authoritatively as possible and straightened his clothes to make himself look less embarrassed. Glancing ahead, he saw that the whipping villager and several other villagers standing with him had their heads lowered and tried not to look up. Are you afraid of seeing his embarrassment and offending him? Still. No matter what, I just didn't see him, or restricted myself from looking at him. Gretel covered his ears and raised his face from the floor, urging his horse to take 2 steps forward, looking down at the whip holder. I understand the situation. Since the fight has ended like this, then, let's call it a day, right? Don't want to fight. This is discussion, intercession, and order. Greet knew that that person would definitely agree, whether it was because he was intimidated by the majesty of a master like him, or because he was afraid that he would really throw a fireball. Sure enough, the man threw away his whip and bowed back. Of course, my lord, of course. Since you pity him, my lord dash. As he spoke, he turned his head back at a 90-degree bend, suppressed his voice, and yelled at his subordinates. Why don't you put this person down yet? Didn't you see your orders? The 2 men hurriedly untied the farmer from the rack and dragged him to Gretel's horse. Gretel jumped off the horse, raised his hand, and healing spells fell bit by bit, wiping away the blood marks on his body. Do you feel better? The farmer managed to get up, his legs weakened, and he knelt down in front of Greet again. Greet sighed helplessly. Get up, get up. Are you feeling better? Can you walk with me? As he spoke, he touched the space bag and threw a piece of bread over. The farmer didn't have time to get up, caught the bread, lowered his head and took a big bite, followed by another. He choked immediately and knelt there, his face red and ears red, and he rolled his eyes. Gretel. He had no choice but to use the wizard's trick to make a crude water bottle, fill it with water and pass it over. While watching him drink, he secretly mobilized the spell model, ready to summon a force field hand to perform the Heimlich maneuver at any time. Fortunately, after the farmer drank some water, he actually washed down the bread stuck in his throat. He took a few more bites, treasured the remaining half of the bread into his arms, and bowed deeply. No problem, sir. You can send me wherever you like. Okay. Greet frowned and looked at the ground. Fortunately, there was just a lot of mud and no cow or pig manure. He looked around. Take me to your fields. I have no land, my lord. Then, take me to see where you farm. The farmer pulled on his tattered clothes to cover a little of his back, and led the way with a grimace. Gretel followed behind and listened to his constant pointing. This land belongs to the Lord, it is planted with wheat, the harvest is not good this year, no, there is no harvest at all. This land is also the land of the Lord, it was planted by the Lothar family, it also grows wheat, wheat. The Lord transported all last year's wheat away, leaving nothing behind, it's like this every year. This land? This land is fallow. Some alfalfa has been planted. I was hoping to raise a sheep. Sheep. The sheep will be given to the Lord. This plot is planted with potatoes, the yield of potatoes is high. Such a small piece of land can feed our family. Having said this, the farmer touched the bread on his chest and smiled with satisfaction. And the Lord doesn't want potatoes. Yes, he doesn't want them. We can keep all the potatoes and eat them for a year. But there are no potatoes this year, it's too cold and the potatoes won't grow. Gretel walked slowly, pointing and asking questions here and there. From the farmer's answer, he roughly understood the cause of the famine. All the land in Russell County, or almost all the land, belonged to lords large and small. The lords didn't care how many tenants there were, since they didn't need many people to look after and drive the pigs anyway. Give them enough land, and the pigs can find grass blades and acorns to eat without starving to death. Then, the small amount of land that remained, Land that was more suitable for farming than for oak trees, was mostly planted to wheat. Some were provided for the Lord's consumption, and most were transported away, possibly towed and sold. Considering that Earl Russell Kong, the Earl's eldest son, and most of the local nobles are not here, but in the distant royal capital, the possibility of these harvests being dragged and sold in exchange for money for the nobles to spend is really too great. Too big. As for the local sharecroppers, doesn't this give them some land? As long as the Lord's land is cultivated, the harvest from the remaining land will all belong to them. What a big pile of potatoes. Feeding them is no problem. No one told you that there would be a great famine this year. Did you ask you to stock up on food? Greet asked slowly. Isn't there anyone who will lead you to grow grain, lead you to pray, and lead you to use holy power to produce grain? No, sir. The farmer bent down deeply. Under his rags, his dark spine was almost bare. Even if the weather is not hot, beads of sweat keep rolling down. One of my cousins in the south of the city rented land from the mage masters, and actually helped the mage masters do a lot of work. He built warehouses and carried grain. It is said that you can borrow grain from them and pay it back next year. At this point, the farmer's eyes filled with envy. Greet nodded secretly. It seems that the local mage tower in Roscommon County still did a good job last year. Unlike the local lords, they really don't do anything. Also, the council conducts inspections and assessments on the mage tower every year. Those who fail to pass will have the resources of the mage tower reduced, and the host will be transferred. He has personally experienced how inconvenient the research work is for a magician who has lost his mage tower. Just for this reason, the local mage system will also work hard to do a good job. But we can't do it, sir, we can't do it. We are the Lord's people, we can't work for the mages. Moreover, there is not so much food to borrow. Greet closed her eyes sadly. Behind him, Sarala leaned down from the phantom horse and asked impatiently. What about the nature priests? What about the servants of the nature god? Didn't they look after you? Sorry, beautiful lady. The farmer subconsciously took 2 steps back, fearing that he would touch this beautiful and exquisitely dressed lady, even if she had pointed ears. I don't understand what you are talking about. I don't understand. That's it? Greet took over. He took out the oak stick from his breast pocket, and with a slight movement of natural force, the short oak stick grew in the wind and turned into the shape of an eyebrow-level stick. The phantom on his body rotated slightly, and the exquisite mage robe turned into a rough linen gown. That's the kind of person who goes to the village, goes to the fields, treats you, and shows you what to plant. Haven't you seen this kind of person? No, no. The farmer kept shaking his head and kept retreating until he fell into the field with a plop and fell backwards. Gretel turned his head in disappointment, turned to the back and squeezed, carefully following the villagers. Have you seen it? I have heard of it, sir. After a long silence, an old farmer, or rather, a farmer who looked older, came out of the crowd and bowed deeply. When I was young, I heard the elders in my family say that when they were young, there were people dressed like this who came to our village to treat patients, deliver babies, and teach us how to grow grains. But then they disappeared. I have never seen this in my life. No yet? Are the priests of nature no longer walking in this county? What happened? What made the worshippers of the god of nature abandon this land? The mage tower didn't report it? Last year, the parliament ordered the parliament to cooperate with the nature god order to produce grains and store grains. The mage tower did not report this news. Gretel was awe-inspiring. He slowly walked through the village, checked the storage situation. No one dared to open the door, but it couldn't block the mage's secret vision, and asked a few more villagers. Finally, he severely threatened the tenant manager. Don't hit people. Don't retaliate against them. I'm coming again. If I find you hitting people, I'll kill you. In order to increase the credibility of his speech, He also manifested a fireball, holding it in his hand and shaking it. The fireball crackled and exploded in his palm, making the village chief's hair curl. He scraped the ground with his heels and backed away, bowing repeatedly. "I won't fight. I won't fight. Master, master, don't worry. I will never lay a finger on them." Gretel visited 4 villages in a row the next day. After running down 5 points, except for the real estate and tenants occupied by the master tower, which can indeed be passed, other areas are completely difficult to describe. Especially the territories of local nobles and the territory of the Spring Water Temple. The temple of the god of war is slightly better, but it only allows the warriors to be full and their families to be half hungry and half full. Most importantly, why did the order of the god of nature disappear? Gretel returned to the mage tower with doubts. When asked bluntly, the presiding mage hesitated. "I was also transferred from another place, and I have been here less than 20 years. When I came here, the god of nature order had already left. I inquired several times, and it seems that they had some conflicts." "No, who did you ask? Local lord? Local temple? Have you actually asked the order of the god of nature in the next county?" Greet was extremely speechless about the host's ability to do things. He rubbed his brows and asked seriously. "So now, where is the relocation work stuck? The local lord refuses to let people go? What methods have you used?" "We made several visits to request, asking the local temple to put pressure. We also wrote to the royal capital and asked the royal mage group in the royal capital to help put pressure. The 8th level mage who presided over the mage tower couldn't stand up straight in front of Gretel, who was also at the 8th level. He frowned and sighed. He talked about his efforts one by one for half an hour. "We have tried every method, but they just don't pay attention. We can't just lift the table and kill all the nobles here, we can't lift it anymore." Greet believes that the saying that it cannot be lifted is true. Yesterday's dinner, the people present at the God of War Temple and the Spring Goddess Temple were all level 9 or above. Although the local noble family heads have all run away, according to Bernard, there are still 2 knights who can fight with him for a while. If this kind of power is gathered together, the mage tower can more than protect itself. It is really a joke to want to kill all the nobles. So how to apply pressure? The local host looked at him longingly. Behind the host, a 5th level mage and 2 2nd level mage looked at him eagerly. According to the general habits of the mage council, most of these low-level mages are the children of local nobles. The mage tower wants to overturn the table, and these people probably won't be able to help. There is a high probability that they will tip off the information, or even delay it. Gretel sighed. If it were him, he would be able to flip the table if he used all his strength, if he really tried his best to fire the fireball, and push the power of the fireball to above level 9, or even to level 10, he should be able to do it. If it's not possible to bring out the council's brand and the teacher's brand again, why not take action together with Sarara? To be honest, an adult silver dragon is more than enough to suppress the nobles of the entire county. I guarantee that they will not have any unnecessary words. Greet believed that the host of the Mage Tower in Roscommon County must have thought so. However, that was definitely not what the Parliament had in mind when they sent him here. If they die, the people will suffer. The people are prosperous and suffer. If you can break the local social order, try not to break it. Think about it, is there any other way to do this well within the rules? He was filled with simmering anger and wanted to shout. At this moment, a bell rang loudly, and soon, an apprentice held a rectangular wooden box, walked quickly, and poked his head at the door. "What's this?" The presiding mage raised his voice and asked. The apprentice bowed and said, "It's a gift from Count Rothcom to Master Nordmark, can you send it in now?" The wooden box was delivered to the center of the living room and the lid was opened. A ham lay quietly in the middle, wrapped in dark red silk, with only a short section of pure black hoof exposed. Gretel didn't even need to untie the silk to feel the pure and familiar power of nature. This is. It's Rothko ham. The best kind. As the apprentice entered the mage tower, the knight who came specially to present the gift bowed deeply to Gretel. My lord Count said, I hope the master will like it. Gretel lowered his eyes and laughed softly. Like it? I do like it, I like it very much. The messenger breathed a sigh of relief and left with peace of mind. Gretel stared at the ham for a moment, then raised his head and looked directly at the presiding mage. Can you give me a map? What? Give me a map? Greed still had a smile on his lips, but there was a layer of ice in his eyes. A map of Losikang County and several surrounding counties. I'm going to walk around and take a look, the surrounding counties, if not, the further counties, there will always be the order of the god of nature. Does it exist? Of course there is. Mr. Mage shuddered, immediately let the students in, and copied a detailed map. Cities, mage towers, hills, bodies of water, lords' manors, and temples are all vividly displayed on the map. Gretel lowered his head, his fingertips brushed across the surface of the map inch by inch, and stopped for a moment on the mark of a large oak tree. I'll go take a look. I'll be back tomorrow, or the day after tomorrow at most. By then, I hope you can let me visit the ancestral home of Earl Luosi-Kang's family, is that okay? He walked away. Take Cyrilla, take Bernard. Walking into the wilderness and out of the border of Roscommon County, he immediately changed into a cloth robe and rode on the back of the silver moon deer. In his hand, among the 8 green leaves on the head of the oak staff, a small black and white snake was swimming up and down. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, ask for all kinds of. Please take a look at your fan value. If it is less than 500, subscribe more. Only those with a fan value of more than 500 are eligible for the lottery. I saw many people asking how to check the fan value. The answer is to post a book review immediately, and then look at the mark behind your name. If you are an apprentice or above, you have a fan value of 500 or above. In other words, there is only a traineeship but not a lottery. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geolan 2020. Chapter 849. Greet wears a burlap robe, rides a huge white deer, and holds an oak staff with a white snake coiled around the body. Step by step through the wilderness, through the swamp, through the woods, through the field ridges. In front of the mount, the barbarian is loyal and leading the way. Behind the mount, a beautiful elf girl with a smile is like a flower, sitting on the back of the snow-white unicorn, looking up at him from time to time. The moonlight is like water, shining on a group of 3 people, and the breeze blows, making it poetic and picturesque. Of course, the so-called unicorn is Miss Silver Dragon putting an illusory shell on the phantom horse. This is, haha, don't go into details. Greet ran across the wilderness, looking at the map from time to time to check the direction. Cyrilla stayed lazily on the back of the fake unicorn, sometimes sitting upright, sometimes sitting sideways, and sometimes sitting upside down. When he got tired of sitting, he urged. Gretel? How far is it? How long will it take to arrive? It's coming, it's coming. It should be coming soon, right? Gretel's ability to survive in the wild is hard to describe, and his ability to read the stars, the terrain, and the direction has not improved much compared to his previous life. No, maybe it's not as good as the previous life, at least the map in the previous life was more accurate. Fortunately, you can also throw in the eagle eye spell from time to time, fly up and take a look with the flying spell, or use the city positioning technique and water body positioning technique to correct the direction according to the map. Well, the error rate should not be high. If you walk 5 kilometers, you should not be deviated by 1 kilometer laterally. Relying on this cheating method and stumbling, I finally approached the big oak tree marked on the map, which should be the headquarters of the Order of the God of Nature. At this point, Gretel no longer dares to use the mage's method. After all, he came as a priest of the God of Nature. The priest of the God of Nature knows the way, and there is no need for these methods. They all knelt down on one knee and prayed to nature, and then asked about the surrounding big trees, weeds, fungi, moss, birds, animals, and fish. In nature, all creatures will give them directions. If it doesn't work, let go of your senses, run to the places with the strongest natural power around you, and look for them one by one. The servants of the God of Nature have never lost their way in the embrace of nature. Hey, even if he is a little bit worse, he still has to pretend, right? Where exactly? It should be nearby. I feel like it should be not far away. Look, there are hills all around, and the oak trees are so dense. The headquarters of the order should be nearby, right? Gretel lowered his voice and whispered. Sirrah made a face at him, straightened up on her horse, and looked left and right. The woods on the left are very dense, and the woods on the right are also very dense. There is a gurgling sound of water in front, and it should look like a creek. So where is the station? Where can one find a priest of the God of Nature? It was dark all the way, and the moonlight shone down from the tops of the treetops, leaving small spots of light like silver coins. Really nice in terms of scenery, and in terms of finding the way, ahem. It's better not to have anything at all. Gretel held his breath and concentrated, spreading his perception, trying to find the direction where the power of nature was strongest. However, although the mental power has been specially trained by the teacher, it is still unable to spread widely. 100 meters, 200 meters. I had only finished sweeping the 2 hills on the left and right, and when I wanted to extend further, I felt my temples pounding. Gretel threw himself on the deer's neck in vain. I'm so tired, Appa, please take me for a walk to the sex headquarters or something. I'll find you later, Appa. Silver Moon Deer's ears perked up, he raised his head and sniffed hard, sniffed again, took big steps, and suddenly started running hard. Greet was thrown back, barely lying down, and got up in a hurry. Appa, Appa, slow down. Take Bernard with you. A quarter of an hour later, Gretel stumbled, rolled off Appa's back, and staggered to his feet. In front of him, 2 rustling oak trees with drooping branches and densely intersecting branches removed their branches, revealing a passage that looked like a portal. At the end of the passage, a tall old man with white beard and hair, leaning on an oak staff, looked over with a frown. Look at Gretel, then look at the oak staff in his hand. Behind him it looks like a silver deer made of moonlight. The more he looks at it, the more he becomes confused. Server of the God of Nature? Guest from afar, you are. Dear Elder, I am Gretel Nordmark, a servant of the God of Nature and an 8th level mage of the Council. Gretel held an oak staff in his hand and bowed his head respectfully. My teacher is Elder Erwin Wilkinson of Heartland City. Before he finished speaking, he saw the old man in front of him raise his white eyebrows. He raised his hand to stop Gretel from announcing his home, and looked him up and down slowly. Gretel Nordmark? I've heard of you. What's the matter with you coming all the way? I was appointed by the Parliament to solve the problem of hungry people in Roscommon County. When I arrived there, I found that there were no brothers who served the God of Nature. I came here specifically to ask for advice. A quarter of an hour later, Gretel, Sarah, Bernard, and the old man named Atef were sitting around a big tree stump. In front of each person is a large wooden cup as thick as a cup. In the cup, the steam of herbal tea is rising. This is an old story. The Earl of Rothcom of that generation wanted to expand the number of black pigs and enclose the forest on a large scale. He took back the land, planted oak trees, and drove out the tenants. A large number of tenants were displaced. Pigs eat people. Gretel moved his lips and whispered. Atef looked at him in surprise and nodded. Some people did say that at the time. However, in fact, it is not pigs eating people, it is clearly people eating people. Let's not talk about it. The count's behavior angered the head of the religious order in the county, and brought the brothers and sisters in that county protest to him. And after? Gretel leaned forward a little. The power of the god of nature priests in the entire county is quite strong when gathered together. However, as far as what he saw this time, there were no pastoral activities of the god of nature in the entire county, so the protest failed. Was it killed, or imprisoned? It would be nice if it was just like that. Elder Atef sighed longly. If we are defeated in a frontal battle, we, the brothers and sisters of the sect, can provide support. If the Lord uses despicable means, poisoning, etc., we will not stand idly by. But he shook his head, lost his mind for a moment, and then shook his head again. I didn't go that time. When I found out, the leader of the religious order in Roscommon County had already evacuated with everyone, and said that unless invited by the Earl, the servants of the god of nature would never set foot there again. I rushed there when I saw him. He vomited blood when he saw me. Elder Atef closed his eyes in pain. He didn't answer anything I asked him. Later, he fell ill not long after. His most beloved disciple, who he had trained for more than 10 years, was not with him. Later I heard that he was dead. Killed by the Lord. No. Elder Atef slowly shook his head. There are various legends. Some say that the child committed suicide, some say that he betrayed his teacher and was executed by the teacher, others say that he seduced the count's daughter and was killed by the count in a rage. The news is very confusing, only the people in the cult won't say anything. And after decades have passed, all the truth has been buried under the loess. Greet exhaled slowly. In short, it was the local cult that broke with the Lord and swore an oath never to look back. It may or may not have been the case, but for so many years, there has been no priest of the god of nature in County Roscommon. This is a fact, and it is a fait accompli recognized by the surrounding areas. The local lord is happy that the followers of the god of nature are not active in the local area, so he can plant oak trees and raise pigs freely. Anyway, oak trees are easy to live, and raising pigs does not require too many people. I went to the banquet this time, and they gave me this. Gretel touched the space bag and took out the so-called high-quality ham. There is the power of nature above. The second son of the Earl said that those pigs were bred in their family's ancestral land. I've heard about it a long time ago. Elder Atef stretched out a finger and gently stroked the surface of the ham. There was a look of anger and pain on the old face. Neither I nor the elders in the surrounding areas have heard that. Several of us have seen this kind of thing. I know what you are suspecting. He raised his head and stared into Gretel's eyes. You are suspecting that these pigs were cultivated in the holy land of the order, where the elders turned into oak trees and returned to nature, right? We have always suspected this, especially because these so-called fine products were only cultivated after the break. Produced in batches. But we can't go check it out. Even if we catch the clue, we can't take action directly. The oath binds us. Mage Nordmark, you are different. You were appointed by the Parliament, and you are a guest invited by the Earl. You. Greet nodded solemnly. After hearing these past events, he had a clearer understanding of the causes and consequences of the incident, and he also had ideas for ways to break the situation. He leaned forward slightly and lowered his voice. I roughly understand. My idea is. The two discussed in low voices for a long time. The more Elder Atef listened, the brighter his eyes became. The more he listened, the faster his white beard moved. Finally, He slammed the table hard. Yes. The premise is, can you make enough noise? That should be okay, right? Greet looked at him a little guiltily. His total mental power, according to previous tests, is not inferior to that of a 9th level mage. However, in terms of the use of natural magic, it's okay. The worst thing is to use the amplification weapon and the magic circle. If that doesn't work, there's still APA. APA's natural magic is also very powerful. My current question is, how many manpower can be mobilized from the surrounding God of Nature order? How much support can they give me? If I force the Lord to bow his head, how many people can come in to help me, guide the victims, and transfer manpower? This, let me do the math. The old man and the young man held their heads and counted for a long time, and then Greet said goodbye and returned, covered with stars and moon. He had a good sleep on the deer's back, and just after noon the next day, he followed the guidance of the Count's second son and arrived at the legendary ancestral land. Yes, it's just ahead. The second son of Earl Logo's icon walked ahead on foot and guided diligently. After our family discovered this area, we fenced it off and maintained it carefully. No farming or grazing of other livestock was allowed. We kept the water source clean and drove away the wolves that hunted nearby, so that the magic pigs growing here would have the best quality. Environment of. He stopped at the foot of the hill. Greet stopped as he did and looked up. The oak trees here are so dense. How old are they? For many years. Oak trees watered by magic water always live a long time. The magic pigs that grow here have a strange aroma in their hams. Yes, I'm very impressed. Gretel smiled. My teacher, you know that the legendary mage has a long life and always likes to find something that can please him. Like the ham here, if I can get the teacher's approval, I will order it every year. No need to order, no need to order, the Count's second son, Knight Pina, was overjoyed. Even though he still maintained the reserve of a noble knight, his waist unconsciously bent forward by 5 degrees. It is an honor for us to be appreciated by the legendary mage. If the Lord of Thunder likes it, we will select the best products every year and send someone to Nevis. Then I'll trouble you. Greet smiled faintly, put on a look that was very accustomed to others' flattering teachers, and walked inside. But I have to take a look at the environment inside. I don't dare to send things with poor growth conditions or disordered magic power to the teacher. He turned his back on guests and strode inside, leaving the Knight of Pina behind for a moment. Cyrilla, Bernard, and Apa filed in, confident, and walked into the valley with their heads held high. When Apa walked past Knight Pina, he deliberately raised his butt and flicked his tail, causing the second son of the Count to stumble on the spot. Lord Newardmark, please wait a moment, I will show you the way, please wait a moment. Greet could no longer hear him. There are many oak trees in front of you, the leaves are rustling in your ears, and the huge, dark green tree crowns are connected together. Tall, towering, gathered. Every leaf seemed to whisper to him. You came. You came. Young friend, brother devoted to nature, you are finally here, welcome to you. Gretel walked forward quickly. The further you go, the more spiritually active you become. He raised his head and breathed hard, feeling that all the pores in his body had been opened, and his whole body seemed to be bathed in the lively power of nature. You can't go wrong, this is it. It is the place where the priests of the god of nature rest. It is the place where high-level priests, when they reach the end of their lives, inject all the natural power of their bodies into the oak staff and return to nature. Each oak tree is the condensed lifelong emotion, experience, wisdom, and knowledge of the pastors. They sleep quietly in this land, waiting for a new apprentice to arrive and pass on their lifelong strength. Raising pigs in a place like this? Use the oak trees here and the acorns that fall every autumn to raise pigs. Nature is fair and merciful. If 1 or 2 wild boars break in here and go out after eating acorns, the believers of the God of nature will only regard it as a natural cycle and will not say anything. However, to occupy the resting place of the priests of the God of nature, to use the place where the ancestors passed down the inheritance, to use it to raise magic pig babies on a large scale, and to be complacent as a characteristic of this county and this family. Count Rothko, how do you want to die? Greed felt that he had never been so angry. He paused, suddenly took off his exquisite magic robe, and put on the burlap priest's robe that he wore when he went to another county last night. He straightened his clothes, took hold of the oak stick that had returned to the form of an eyebrow stick, and strode forward. He no longer even looked at the road, but followed his instincts and spiritual guidance and climbed up the mountain in one breath. Just like when he had just advanced to a first-level priest, Elder Irwin took him to his resting place and asked him to find a big tree. I am coming. I am coming. Seniors who sleep here, please tolerate me, guide me, and teach me. Please give me a helping hand, show the power of the natural priest, and vent the anger and majesty of nature. When the second son of the Earl rushed over panting, he saw Gretel wearing a burlap robe, holding an oak staff, and kneeling on the ground on one knee. He closed his eyes, pressed one hand on the ground, and rested his forehead on the nearest big tree. It seemed as if he was chanting something, and he seemed to have fallen into the deepest meditation. The corners of his clothes and robes hung silently, and the 8 green leaves on the head of the staff stand straight together, shining with green light. What's happening here? The second son of the Earl panicked and tried to pull Cyrilla, but Cyrilla rolled his eyes and threw him away with one arm. When he asked Bernard again, the barbarian glared at him fiercely and pulled him behind him. I wanted to ask again, but my feet suddenly staggered and I almost rolled down the hillside. The hillsides were shaking. The oak trees were shaking. The entire hills, the entire oak forest, trees, rocks, and streams were all rumbling and shaking. It was as if a wild hurricane blew through the forest tops, and dead branches and leaves flew up from the ground. Together with the acorns that were not found in the leaf pile, they crackled directly on the Count's second son. What happened? I can't stay in this place anymore. The Count's second son rolled and rolled out of the forest. Every step stumbles, every step leads to a pit, thorns are growing, weeds are entangled crazily, and insects are swooping and biting. At this moment, he seemed to have become the enemy of the entire world, the entire nature. The second son of the Earl ran all the way down the mountain, his robes already torn in strands, like rags. He rubbed the bitten cheek and looked up the mountain in shock. His legs went weak on the spot and he sat down on the ground. The entire mountain forest is growing crazily. Old trees drooped their branches, young trees sprouted from the ground, thick, iron-like thorns blocked every intersection, and worthless weeds blocked all hillsides. And this growth continues. The second son of the Earl stepped back step by step, watching the weeds and thorns spreading to his feet step by step, and even watching the saplings spring up one by one. For some reason, an ancient legend suddenly appeared in his mind. According to legend, where believers of the God of nature gather, 1,000-year-old trees will turn into tree men and move around freely. It can turn branches into powerful arms, which can beat people into pulp with one blow. It will pick off the fruit and throw it at people, with a bang, it will explode through the armor. Have I encountered such a scene? Have these oak trees turned into tree people? Will they come out to hunt me down? He shook his head desperately, backed up step by step, and finally turned around and started running wildly. He ran out for an unknown amount of time. When the movement behind him finally stopped, he fell to the ground, his eyes filled with confusion. It's over. This woodland is finished. Without spending a lot of manpower to open up the forest land, there is no need to expect that another wild boar will enter the forest land and another wild boar will eat acorns. The core business of the family, the most important product on which to interact with the nobles of the royal capital, is over. I don't know how long I have been in a daze, but I only know that the sky is gradually getting darker, and suddenly it is already the moon at the top of the sky. The bushes and thorns parted silently and softly, and Gretel, wearing a burlap robe and holding an oak staff, rode out slowly on a huge white deer. The moonlight draped over him in a mighty way, boiling silently, like a flame. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, ask for all kinds of. Please take a look at your fan value. Only those with a fan value of more than 500 are eligible for the draw. The 515 update of 25,000 words has been completed. Everyone remembers that from the 16th to the 18th, click on the 515 events page on the Kidian app bookshelf page, find the Breaking Welfare item in the upper left corner of the page, click in, search for this book, and receive lottery tickets for the lottery. If you don't know if your follower value matches, just post a post and look at the follower mark after your name. Anyone who is not an intern can win the prize. I'm exhausted, I'm really exhausted. I've been writing and writing these days despite the irritating pressure of the epidemic, people in my community who tested positive for COVID-19, lockdown, silence, and not being able to buy groceries. Today's update is 25,000. There will be no more updates tomorrow. Let me just lie down for a few days and take a rest after reading 4,000 words a day. Don't forget to draw a lottery, let's show off if you win a big prize. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 850. The Count's second son turned pale and retreated step by step. Unable to take a few steps back, he stumbled and fell to the ground. He didn't even have the time to get up, and he also forgot that his knight's physique could have performed better in terms of strength, speed, and balance. Using both hands and feet, he crawled backwards, shouting while crawling. "Don't kill me! Don't kill me!" Gretel looked down at him coldly, anger surging in his eyes. On the shoulders, body, and around the silver moon deer, the moonlight is still gently undulating and boiling. Thousands of branches and leaves swayed behind him, as if leaves would leave the branches and fly out at any moment. The sorrow and anger he felt when he knelt down in the jungle just now and communicated with the oak trees still echoed in his heart. Time has passed for too long, the person involved died, walked away, and sealed the truth. Maybe no one will know the truth of the matter. But the oak tree precipitated that sadness, remembered that anger, and conveyed that unwillingness. I didn't betray. I didn't. Such a huge emotional impact showed no signs of abating until the entire inheritance land completely exploded. He urged the silver moon deer to take one step forward, and then another step. Suddenly there was a soft explosion, and a ray of boiling moonlight exploded around him, shooting directly towards the second son of the Earl. At the critical moment, the second son of the Earl quickly turned his head. The ray of moonlight fell on the ground beside his face and exploded with crackles. His cheek hurt, and he subconsciously stretched out his hand to touch it, and found a faint red mark on his fingertips. And around Greet, more moonlight dots began to condense, rise, float, and rotate. "Don't kill me! Don't kill me!" the Count's second son screamed with his neck straight. While howling, he rolled on the ground to avoid the stars exploding one by one. "I didn't do it. I wasn't born yet at that time. I didn't know anything. I just took over the family's business. I'll do whatever I did before." Crack, crackle, crackle. Several tiny starlights continued to rub around his body and exploded. The speed was extremely fast at first, and gradually became slower and slower. Finally, Gretel took a long breath and tightened the oak staff in his hand. "You do not know." "I don't know. I really don't know anything." The Count's second son retreated again and again, leaning his back against an oak tree, trying to shrink down. "I only know that there is a magic spring here. The acorns produced by watering can feed the best piglets. We usually surround this place and don't let anyone come, and we don't come ourselves either. Gretel slowly lowered his eyes. Don't get angry, don't get too angry, don't kill. There is no use in killing this guy. The Earl's eldest son, the people in their family who can really make the final decision are all in the royal capital. He said this to himself quietly. Think about what you came here to do, think about which group of people are in urgent need of your help, and think about how to establish a new balance before you leave to make the lives of local people less difficult. Think about it. Gretel, what you want to do is not kill anyone. Gretel let out a long breath. Then, under the horrified gaze of the second Earl's son, he raised his oak staff high and pointed it straight to the sky. The moonlight surrounding him gathered for a moment, intertwined with the green light emerging from the jungle, and suddenly surged, pointing straight into the sky. After shooting to the highest point, it exploded brilliantly like fireworks, scattering stars everywhere. They were blown and pushed by the summer night wind, scattered far away, and fell towards the hills and woodlands 1, 2, 3, or 5 miles away. Finally, Greet took back the oak staff, swayed slightly, and closed his eyes. The second son of the Earl had been lying limply on the ground, staring blankly. The oak tree leaning behind me gently shook its branches and leaves, as if something had changed, but also as if nothing had happened. But no matter what, the imminent killing intent, the spark that blasted through his coat and wiped blood on his cheek, finally disappeared. What did you do? He jumped up and asked softly. Greet closed his eyes and didn't answer, and even the white deer under him lowered his head, his ribs rising and falling, as if he was very tired. The second son of the Earl looked left and right, then took a tentative step forward. Stop! A huge figure stood in front of him. The barbarian held the antlers with one hand and pulled out the big bone stick from his back with the other hand, pointing far ahead. Don't come over. I just want to ask the mage what you did. The second son of the Earl quickly stopped and spread his hands to show that he was not hostile. I had good intentions and led the master to visit the family's ancestral land, but it made the master so angry. I just want to know what we did wrong and what we need to do to calm down your anger. This is not your family's ancestral land. Gretel had kept his eyes closed and said nothing. Hearing this, he spoke softly. His voice was low, slow, and out of breath. What he said shocked the second son of the Earl and almost jumped up. This is the inheritance place of the nature priest. For decades, you have expelled the nature priest, occupied this holy land, and used the oak trees inherited by the nature priest and the acorns to raise pigs. There was a crunching sound next to him, but the barbarian looked angry and took a step forward, crushing something unknown. The second son of the Earl subconsciously shrank back and slid a little to the side along the trunk of the tree, when he heard Gretel say, "Bernard, be quiet. There's no point in arguing with them here. Sarah, do me a favor. What's up?" Under the horrified gaze of the second son of the Earl, the elf beauty urged the unicorn to come forward, with a look of eagerness on her face. Greet said slowly, "I'm very tired now and have no strength. Please help me draft a few letters and send them to Elder Irwin, my teacher in the order, Elder Wood from the Nevis order, and Nyo from the Royal Capital order. Elder Kurz. By the way, the council also sent a letter." "No problem. I'll write it right away." The elf beauty took out a pen and paper and looked up into the sky. The paper was unfolded flatly, the quill was stained with ink and started writing on it automatically. "As I write, I ask. Who else should I tell? Do the judges need to be notified? In addition to the Lord of Thunder, do the other legends want to write letters? The Queen, and several of the Queen's female officers, do you want me to notify them all?" The second son of the Earl almost collapsed on the ground. After writing this round of letters, not only him, but also everyone in the family in the royal capital will probably fall under the wrath of the god of nature religion. There are also the Queen, the nobles of the royal capital, the legendary mage. As long as one of them expresses disgust towards them, even if it is just a look of disdain. Even if the Losikang family is lucky enough to survive, they will always be the laughing stock and be expelled from the aristocratic circle. We will compensate. We are willing to compensate. Any compensation is fine, he screamed like a rooster whose neck was stepped on. Don't write a letter. Don't write a letter yet. You can give us anything, whether it's land or property. Or tenant farmers, doesn't the Congress want to relocate tenant farmers? We agree. You can relocate as much as you want. Greet glanced at him with disdain. When you hit a wall, you know you have turned. When a knife is held on your neck, you know you beg for mercy. But what about before? You shouldn't talk to me about these things, he said softly. You shouldn't talk to me about compensation. The one you kicked out was the local god of nature order. I'm going to ask them to come back. I'm going to beg them. Don't write. Don't write. I'm so tired, I'm paralyzed from exhaustion, and I still have to worry about the vegetables that I bought in a group purchase. The news says that the lockdown has begun to be gradually lifted. All our shopping platforms, including Dobeo, JD.com, Hema, and Ding Dong, are still dead. Doxionda pretends to be alive but actually has no capacity at all. Ding Dong neighborhood group still has its last breath. The promised social aspect will be cleared. Please subscribe, please give me monthly votes, please recommend votes, please review books, please give me some comfort for the author. Thanks to @Jaska, @Bulilanshan, @Hunchard, @Rawson for the 500 starting coins reward. The explosion rate of the explosive lottery is still good. After the author drew it, he could get an average of nearly 100 starting coins in the 5 lottery draws. Everyone, hurry up. You can draw from today to the 18th. The path is Kidian app, Discovery, Events -515 point Mother's Birthday Party, the second one in the upper left corner, the Hot News Bonus, the 4th page of the Hot News list, the 20th, This is my book, get the chance to win the lottery, scroll down to win the prize. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 851. Early the next morning, Gretel was sitting in the living room of the Mage Tower with sleepy eyes and an oak staff in his arms. His head bit by bit, almost hitting the top of the oak staff. There was nothing I could do. I used my ultimate move last night and all my energy was drained away. Even though I meditated for half the night and slept for a while, it was still not filled up. If it weren't for the urgent need to solve the problem and the hurried arrival of guests, I would have just slept for 3 days and 3 nights. On the main seat next to him, the presiding mage of Riscombe County sat straight and glanced at him from time to time. The shoulder blades are tightened, the spine is stiff, and the whole person is on pins and needles. This Nordmark mage is so capable of making things worse. It's only been a few days since I arrived and things have turned upside down. The local nobles, the temple, and the out-of-town nature god order, which I haven't seen for decades, are all here. He also needs to be the host in the middle, while the mage Nordmark himself sits on the edge and takes a nap. But he didn't dare to say anything. In terms of level, the level of mages is about the same, but the arcane level is lower than others. As for the background, he is a direct disciple of the legendary mage. As long as he has a decent background, he will not be thrown out of town for 20 years. In terms of strength, well, he was still secretly frightened by the shock last night. Even if he squeezed out the 200 pounds of flesh and put it on, he couldn't make half of the movement. He looked to his left. Elder Atef was furious and his face was as dark as water. He was surrounded by several high-ranking priests of the god of nature, all of whom looked like they wanted to kill someone. Looking at the right side again, the second son of Count Riscombe, Knight Pina, has a pale face and his tall body shrinks. There were a group of aristocratic children beside him, half of them had solemn expressions, and the other half looked a little bit amused. In the VIP seats on the side, the Temple of the God of War and the Temple of the Goddess of Spring, the two leaders are arranged on the left and right. The two high-ranking priests looked at their noses with their eyes, their mouths with their noses, and their hearts with their mouths. Their faces were solemn and unfathomable. But the presiding mage knew that the opinions of these two people could never be ignored. The entanglement between the temple and the local nobles is much deeper than that of the mage tower. Especially in the Spring Temple, the important positions below the high priest are almost all children of local nobles. Tell me about it. Watching Gretel's chin slide off the oak staff for the second time, and then struggling to sit upright, the presiding mage sighed secretly, knowing that he could not count on this special envoy. He coughed lightly and raised his hand to the second son of the earl. The Losikang family has long occupied the inheritance land of the Order of the God of Nature and grazes pigs. How do you plan to compensate for this abominable behavior? This is blasphemy. Elder Atef immediately raised his voice and said. The place of inheritance is a holy place where the religious order holds ceremonies and worships the God of nature. It is also the resting place of past priests. Grazing pigs here on a large scale and manufacturing special products of the family is blasphemous. He turned his eyes coldly and looked at the representatives of the two temples. Priest Randall, what would you do if someone was herding pigs in the goddess's holy spring? Archbishop Chaudhary, what would you do if someone occupied the burial ground of the God of War knights and let the demon pigs trample them wantonly? Do. Archbishop God of War was livid and silent. How to do it? According to the custom of the God of War temple, of course, the skulls of the blasphemers' family were directly lifted off, and then the graves of 8 generations of their ancestors were dug up. Let me dance on your grave. Let you dance on the graves of the Ares knights. But half of the priests of the God of War are children of local nobles, 1/3 of the warriors in the Temple of God of War are children of nobles. His personal bodyguard, the deputy leader of the knights, and even the son of the count's second son. Last night, the vice-captain knelt in the temple all night, begging bitterly. The family can give up anything and want nothing. He can even go on the road of atonement and become a follower of the priest of the God of nature. I just asked the archbishop to say a word for the Losikang family. It is okay to compensate and be punished, but the crime must not be blasphemy. It cannot be blasphemous under any circumstances. High Priest Randall didn't want to speak even more. The goddess of spring water is the ancestral god of the royal family. The temple treats such blasphemous behavior even more severely. Anyone who draws water from the clean water source enclosed by the temple without permission will be whipped. As for pouring dirty water into clean water sources, taking out garbage, or even defecating at will. How do you want to die? The temple and the temple are connected with each other. Today other gods are being blasphemed. If you don't speak up for them, tomorrow someone will dare to step on your face. The problem is that the priests and knights of the Spring Temple are almost all children of nobles. In addition to its own property, a large part of the daily expenses of the temple also come from donations from nobles. Last night, the Losikang family sent people to deliver heavy gifts overnight, and promised that as long as they get through this test, the Losikang family's ham industry will be distributed to the temple. The nature of this behavior is very serious. Very bad, he scolded with a stern face. Knight Pina, how dare you? How dare the Raskambe family seize the inheritance land of the Order of the God of Nature, trample it wantonly, and herd livestock? You are so greedy that you have completely lost your mind. We don't know. Knight Pina fell to his knees on the ground and cried with tears. We really don't know. I always thought that this forest just has a magic spring that watered some good oak trees. If I really knew it was a place of inheritance, I would definitely hide it and never dare to bring it with me. People come and visit. Does this mean that I tricked you into visiting? Greet wanted to curl her lips, but her eyelids drooped downwards, and she simply remained silent. Elder Atef said angrily. You don't know, how can your family know? Eric and the others were driven away by your grandfather, the Earl of your previous generation. Behind him, several elderly sect elders and a dozen middle-aged priests glared at him. Knight Pina denied it with a grimace. But we really don't know, there are more than a dozen hills in that area, and there are trees everywhere. We look at them as woods, and the woods are among the woods, we really can't tell the difference. We are willing to compensate. We are willing to compensate. Before Elder Atef could continue to get angry, he shouted in a hoarse voice. We are willing to invite the servants of the God of Nature to come back. Please sort out the inheritance land yourself. Once it is consumed, the Losikang family will be responsible. Over the years, all the money the Losikang family has earned in the inheritance place will be returned to the religious order. Double your money back. Elder Atef's face was still terrifyingly gloomy. Archbishop Chaudhry of the Temple of the God of War looked left and right and coughed. This is definitely not enough. Knight Pina, are you, the Raskambe family, sincere? For such a serious sacrilege, you must perform sacramental atonement. Where is the Count? Let him come back. We are willing. We are willing, Knight Pina promised. I have already informed my father. As long as he gets the news, he will definitely come back as soon as possible. At that time, he will personally discuss with you adults how to compensate. 8 pounds of vegetables from Pinduoduo arrived today, and I finally don't have to worry about eating vegetables in 7 days. I only have to write 4,000 words a day, so happy, especially after working hard to update. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, ask for all kinds of. Thanks to @Rawson, @I'm so happy that I didn't take any medicine today, @angrily chopped off the dog, @Daowajiang, @bookfriend 202003060021176447 for the reward of 500 starting coins. Thanks to for the 100 starting coins. By the way, your dear author, I'd like to mention a pornographic code today. It seems to be the Yang downstairs who was dragged away a few days ago. The data was finally uploaded, and then our home was assigned a yellow code as a secondary connection. I don't know what the use of this yellow code is except for doing nucleic acid tests and throwing away garbage without leaving home. Maybe the only use is that you don't have to leave the house at all, and the express delivery will be delivered to your doorstep. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Jialan 2020. Chapter 852. What does the Sacrament of Atonement look like? Gretel finally heard something that made him a little curious. He barely shook off a little drowsiness, opened his eyes, lowered his voice, and asked the host of the Mage Tower sitting next to him in a low voice. He really hasn't seen it. He has never seen either the Temple of the God of War or the Temple of the Goddess of Spring. As for the Order of the God of Nature, in Gretel's impression, they are all good old people. Of course, good people also get angry sometimes, and it's even more terrifying when a good person gets angry, but what does the Sacrament of Atonement look like? From all the experiences and knowledge Gretel had in her past and present lives, she had only ever heard of the Sacrament of Atonement once. It was like an emperor who, after being deposed by the Pope, wore the simple clothes of an ascetic in the middle of winter and walked barefoot to the top of a mountain. Did he stand outside the church door, or kneel, for 3 days and 3 nights, relying only on a felt blanket for warmth? But that's not the style of natural priests. What are their sacraments like? What would they ask the Redeemer to do? The 8th level mage turned to look at him and sighed helplessly. Mage Nordmark, it seems that you are also the priest of the God of Nature. You were the one who made the matter bigger and raised an eyebrow to punish me. The rules of the order of the God of nature, why do you come to ask me? Fortunately, his voice was very low, and all the clergy present tacitly pretended not to hear. Elder Atef quoted scriptures and argued with Archbishop God of War and Priestess of Spring Water for a long time. The person who blasphemed the God of War, didn't you ask him to dig out a rock of the same height with his own hands, carve it into a statue of the God of War, then wear sackcloth, carry the statue on his back, and go to the temple to offer it in person? That's the highest level of blasphemy, and it seems you don't have a statue. The Duke who killed the priestess last time was wearing sackcloth, walked barefoot into the main hall from the entrance to the temple square, and performed the sacramental confession in front of the goddess, right? That's true, but you don't seem to have a temple? Do you want Earl Roscommon to walk into the wilderness? Or climb a mountain barefoot? That mountain is all covered with thorns. Hiking barefoot, walking on the flagstones of the temple square, and walking on the thorn bushes in the wild are completely different concepts, right? Quarreling, bickering. It took a long time for everyone to reluctantly reach an agreement. Of course, in the end, Earl Luosecan, who rushed back from the royal capital, had to confirm it in person. Generally speaking, the severity of the sacrament of atonement is closely related to the compensation paid to the blasphemer. It is absolutely not enough to compensate for the prophet of Ham, Elder Atef, on behalf of the surrounding nature god order, especially the members of the order who have selected a team and are preparing to return to Roscommon County, severely condemned. Why, I have raised pigs on your ancestral grave for decades, and I will tell you later that I will compensate you for the money from the sale of these pigs. With such a good thing, we will also occupy the Earl's castle later. Pigs have been raised in the castle for decades. But we really can't come up with anything else. The Count's second son burst into tears. I am several decades old, and I am usually very pampered, but now I am really embarrassed and crying. Not only did she cry, but she also begged on her knees. All she had to do was throw a tantrum and roll around on the spot. Everyone knows how thin the profits from farming are. Our family only makes a little money by raising pigs and making hams all year round, and most of it has to be sent to the royal capital. The money is all in the hands of the Earl, and I will do it again and again. Son, there's only so much you can use. If it's not enough. He waved his hand and drew a huge circle. There are still 3 batches of ham in the cellar, all from last year, the year before, and the year before that, waiting to be matured and sold. You can drag these away. There is no more. Seeing that the more he spoke, the more outrageous he became. Gretel couldn't stand it any longer, coughed slightly, and joined the conversation. The Order of the God of Nature, does it originally have an industry in Roscommon County? As far as he knows, there should be. Near Heartland City, the cult has 2 small villages, and there are still a few shabby houses in the city. The religious order in Nevis is so vast. 2 entire hills belong to them. What about County Rothcombe? Then it is a county after all. The sex industry will be huge. After the religious group withdrew, the land, houses, and villagers who lived on this land belonged to them. Who does it all belong to? Who divided it up? The living room fell silent for a moment. Behind Elder Atef, a middle-aged man came out, his face full of indignation. Yes. There are all of them. Around the place of inheritance, there are 2 hills, a small river, and the villages by the river, all belong to the religious order. There are also other scattered pieces of land. He raised his hand slightly and displayed a map of Roscommon County in the air, and also outlined the sect's former properties. Greet stared intently and quickly calculated that these industries together accounted for about 1/20 of the area of Roscommon County. Although most of them are not very good land, the combined area is quite large. More importantly, the industry of the god of nature has always been the last pressure-reducing valve for the local area. The Lord had exploited him so much that he was really hungry and had nothing to eat. In the fields owned by the cult, you can secretly rent and plant a little bit. In the woods owned by the cult, you can go in and pick wild fruits at will without fear of being hung up and beaten. This land belongs to our family. Behind the count's second son, a nobleman whom Gretel didn't know suddenly jumped up. Our family bought it. We bought it with real money. There are transaction documents and registration with the county and city hall. Our family also bought this piece of land, another nobleman also chimed in. Greet slowly glanced around the living room. There were several nobles who did not dare to speak, but there were gloomy or worried looks on their faces. As for Mr. Magistrate and the two temple leaders, no need to ask, it is estimated that every family will have a share in dividing the sex property, and everyone will have something to spend. Want to take back the industry from everyone? Do you want the order of the god of nature to offend all the nobles and powerful people in this county just after their return? Forget it, let me do this evil thing. The pigs in Roscommon County are afraid that they won't be able to eat acorns in the future. Gretel lowered his head, lowered his eyes, and said softly. The so-called pigs that grew up eating acorns and made ham with the flavor of acorns, this unique industry is probably going to disappear. What? What did you say? Except for a few clergy who remained calm, everyone present asked questions at almost the same time. Can't make ham? The industry is gone? In the entire county of Roscommon, this is the largest and almost the only pillar industry that can make a lot of profits. This cannot be done. The income of the entire county will be reduced by more than 60% in an instant. Gretel's face was solemn and his voice was cold. He said slowly. When I was praying at the heritage site yesterday, I told those oak trees not to bear too many acorns in the future. I also asked them to tell other oak trees not to bear too many acorns. These days are the season for oak trees to bloom and pollinate. He raised his head, glanced around the surroundings emotionlessly, and looked into every pair of anxious eyes. Based on the speed of pollen dispersion, it is estimated that all the oak trees will have heard the news by this time. Of course, they may not listen to me. With a bang, Elder Atef stood up, turned around, rushed to the window, and jumped out. He didn't even have time to go down the stairs, but opened his arms and flew directly out of the mage tower like a big bird. He fell to the edge of the clearing and threw himself on the trunk of an oak tree. The second oak tree, the third oak tree. After a while, the elder returned to the living room with a solemn face and nodded to everyone present. They know. I asked a dozen oak trees around and they will only produce a few acorns this year and from now on. Falling to the ground, being stepped into the mud by wild animals, being pecked away by birds, being picked up by squirrels. Then, take root, sprout, and grow elsewhere. Enough to grow new oak trees, but not enough to feed the wild boars that roam the woods. As for how to restore the oak tree to normal strength, Elder Atef raised his chin high and looked around the living room with determination at all the nobles who were anxious or pretending not to be anxious. Then, come and ask the nature priest to talk to every oak tree. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, ask for all kinds of. Thanks to Etkuzuaran Lusti Walayong for the reward of 2,000 starting coins. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 853. That's basically it. Gretel covered his mouth with his right hand and yawned widely. Facing the eyes of awe, fear, and sigh in the entire meeting hall, he turned around leisurely. You guys talk, I'm going to bed, I'll listen to the results later. I'm so sleepy. He walked out without any hesitation. After taking 2 steps, he yawned. After taking 3 steps, he started to stagger. Before he could walk out of the meeting hall, he stumbled and was about to slide down the oak stick. The elf beauty following behind grabbed her, lifted her out, and disappeared. The barbarian followers around him didn't even have time to get started. Deathly silence. The presiding mage watched Gretel leave, slowly exhaled, and wiped the cold sweat from his forehead with his backhand. This move was a blow to the bottom of the pot, so cruel. Want to feed acorn squash to pigs? The oak tree must first bear fruit. Want an oak tree to bear fruit? Then, go discuss it with the cult of the god of nature. The speed of discussion must be faster, otherwise there are so many households in the entire county and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of oak trees. Guess when it will be your turn? There are only a few priests who can talk to oak trees. They talk about 10 or 20 trees a day. Probably, 10 years from now, it will be about your family's industry. Of course there is a way. If you feel like cutting down old trees is too tiring, you can set fire to the mountain. Then plant a new batch of oak trees. Then the question arises, not to mention whether cutting down oak trees in large numbers will directly confront the worshippers of the god of nature. Guess, how many years will it take for newly planted seedlings to grow, and how many more years will it take for the number of fruits to catch up with the old trees? 5 years? 8 years? 10 years? After 10 or 8 years, I am afraid no one will remember the name of Lossikingham. And want to continue producing stably? Come, discuss with the nature god cult and accept their conditions. Whether it is giving up the land that was occupied in the past, releasing a little more land for the poor to grow food, or allowing the poor to go to the woods to collect wild fruits and acorns. In addition, the presiding mage knew that the parliament wanted these nobles to release more relief grains and allow a group of tenant farmers with no livelihood to leave their hometowns, and this matter had to be settled. Even because of this, he must stand firmly on the side of the nature priests and the Nordmark mage. Well, after the servants of the god of nature left, there were indeed some properties that were managed by the mage tower. Now that you are back, I will arrange for the people below to check and hand over the properties and related income. He nodded to Elder Atef with a cheerful face. Do you need money or grain? Wheat? Rye? Do you need livestock? How can settlement be more convenient for you? Grand Priest Randall of the Temple of the Spring Goddess. Archbishop Chaudhry of the God of War Temple. The second son of the Earl. A group of noble children who were left behind to take care of their family business, and a group of minor nobles who were not qualified to go to the royal capital and had to stay here. The nature cult left before, and their property was divided among everyone. Everyone ate it, and everyone bit a piece, and their mouths were full of oil, so everyone had a tacit understanding that no one had tried to invite them back. You are also a thick-browed man, so why did you betray them directly? The mage turned a blind eye. The industry of the mage tower is certainly important, but what is more important is the assessment of the parliament. As for this year's major disaster, no one will starve to death in Lossican County, and fewer people will starve to death. If the local food storage is not enough, try to transport the poor as much as possible, which is the top priority of the assessment. In order to achieve this goal, is it important to allocate some industry? That's not important at all. Even if it was to get Master Nordmark to say a few more good things about him, or to say less bad things about him after returning, he would take advantage of this momentum and work hard to build a good relationship with the nature order. After a good night's sleep, Greet crawled out with a pillow mark on half of her face to eat dinner and listen to the news. What made him happy was that while he was sleeping, the leading figures in Roscommon County really reached an agreement. First, the Earl of Logo's Ikong family returned the inheritance land of the god of nature order and held a ceremony to make amends. The gains made in the inheritance land over the past few decades will be returned double. Second, all forces in the county should return all properties owned by the god of nature religion. Whether it is mountains, pastures, swamps, or villages, All tenants in the villages will be refunded, and the relevant income plus interest will be refunded in installments. Third, the temple, the mage tower, and various noble families check and store food and provide it to the poor for free. Open up mountains, forests, and other territories, allowing tenants to hunt and gather to survive the famine years. Fourth, in view of the fact that the grain reserves are still not enough to allow all the poor people in the territory to survive the famine years, all parties in Riscon County unanimously agreed to unconditionally allow the poor to leave the local area. Fifth, all in all, the Order of the God of Nature won a great victory and basically recovered its previous losses. Moreover, with the collateral in hand, I am not afraid that those guys will not transfer the property. The Mage Tower was basically victorious and achieved the goal set by the council, or in other words, achieved a verbal promise. Next is the issue of implementation, and in terms of helping the poor, the Order of the God of Nature is the most reliable partner of the Mage Tower. The representatives of other forces all looked ugly. Especially the second son of the Earl, Gretel was really afraid that he would lose his mind and turn dark. What if there is some kind of ritual to summon the devil, it will explode, haha. In a year of great disaster, we really cannot afford to add insult to injury. Gretel sighed silently. Forget it, let's show them a clear path. Hey, speaking of which, your high-quality ham is quite delicious. Do you want to continue making it? He took a spoonful of fish soup, swallowed it slowly, and asked with a smile. A top product. Flagship product. The most profitable product. Does the loss hurt? Do you really want to take it back? The Count's second son's eyes lit up. Along with both sides of the long table, all stakeholders raised their heads. Do. Who doesn't want to do it? Rothkoham does have a bit of a reputation, but only a bit. Iolan Island is still a countryside compared to the royal capital and Nevis. Without any products with magical properties, it is difficult to open up sales. But what to do now? The inheritance place of the Order of the God of Nature has been returned and cannot be used anymore. Even if they don't pay it back, they wouldn't dare even if I gave them 10,000 courages now. Hey, why don't you cooperate? Greed tore up a piece of bread, dipped it in the fish soup, and took another bite. Well, this fish soup is a bit fishy, is it really missing ginger? He pointed to Elder Atef with the chipped bread. You guys cooperate. The sect is responsible for maintaining the trees, you are responsible for making the ham, and everyone shares the profits from the sales. The sect can also issue a certification to show that it was infiltrated by the power of nature. A reasonable share, everyone will be well. Wouldn't it be good if the price can go up this way? The regional economic situation will be better, and more fields can be freed up for farming, so that the local poor can breathe a little more. Well, of course. But in this way, the entire ham industry chain, upstream and downstream, from raw material production to terminal certification, is all in the hands of the God of Nature. What they say in the future will be what the local nobles will listen to. We want to make a fortune together, but the money is in the hands of others. Or should we maintain industrial independence, but make getting rich less enjoyable? It's so hard to choose. Mage Nordmark, you are so cruel. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, ask for all kinds of. Thanks to @Urban Whale Shark for the 500 starting coin reward. Good news, our Doxionda store has recovered. Once Doxionda recovers, you no longer need to worry about lack of vegetables. The vegetable buns from Ding Dong Neighborhood Group are very poor and not friendly at all. Follow up, after driving for an hour, there is no capacity again. I hope that its capacity will stabilize and recover in 3 days. After 3 days, our family will have to buy groceries again.